Kang Ji-hoon died, with his fingers pinching a torn artery. When the operating room buckled, the staff shouted for him to run. He found the vessel by touch, closed the final clamp, and disappeared beneath the ceiling. He woke as 19-year-old Kai Vale in a ruined clinic on Eldor's border. Creditors hammered on the front door, demanding 300 silver crowns owed by Kai's dead father. The rear entrance faced the forbidden forest. Pale words appeared before him. Absolute diagnosis system activated. The rear door tore from its upper hinge. A woman with a broken black horn stumbled inside and collapsed at his feet. Patient, high demon. Diagnosis, collapse of a royal core. Estimated time until death, 11 minutes. Then the system displayed its best treatment. Complete mutual life resonance through intimate union with a bearer of an unregistered soul. Ji-hoon read it twice. The creditors kept pounding at the front. The dying woman lay beside the forest door. He lifted her onto the table and reached for a knife. Whatever world this was, he remained a doctor. The system showed the demon woman's body as 3 overlapping maps. The first displayed flesh, bone, blood, and organs. The second traced channels of dark red mana through her limbs. The third was harder to look at. It formed a web around her chest and throat, made from symbols that moved when Kai tried to focus on them. The central knot sat behind her breastbone. It had folded inward and was pulling the rest of the web after it. Fragments of borrowed memories surfaced while he worked. Oren Vale had died 7 months earlier. The original Kai had spent the previous night burning with fever and had collapsed while crawling toward his father's locked study. Black veins spreading across his wrist. The young man's mind was gone. His memories, his pain, and his name now rested in Ji-hoon's hands. Kai ignored the recommended treatment and searched for anything that could buy time. He found a jar of bitter root in Oren's cabinet, 2 coils of silver thread, a bottle of old grain spirit, and a copper needle meant for draining swollen joints. He boiled water over the stove while the woman convulsed hard enough to bend the table legs. The system identified every item he touched. Most were useless. Bitterroot would slow the mana flow for less than a minute. Silver could conduct the pressure out of her core, but only if placed within a finger's width of the collapsed channel. The copper needle would melt if it carried too much energy. Kai used all 3. He cut a narrow opening below her collarbone, guided the silver thread through the tissue, and pushed the copper needle into the point the system marked. Dark light crawled up the metal. The needle began to glow. He poured the bitterroot mixture between her clenched teeth. The violent pulse beneath his fingers slowed. The countdown stopped at 8 minutes and changed to 43. 43 minutes gave Kai time to wake her, explain what he had found, and hear an answer while she could still speak for herself. Kai cleaned the cut and pressed a folded cloth over it. The woman's eyes opened as he tightened the bandage. They were amber, with thin black rings around the pupils. Her hand closed around his wrist before he could pull away. The grip was strong enough to grind the bones together. She asked where she was. Kai told her she had entered the clinic of Kai Vale. He explained that something inside her chest was forcing her life energy to collapse inward. He also explained that the metal in her body would fail soon. Her eyes moved to the blood on his sleeves, then to the silver thread beneath her skin. She asked whether he had touched her core. He said he had touched it just enough to keep her alive. The woman tried to sit. Pain folded her back onto the table. Her broken horn struck the wood with a dull knock. Kai gave her the full diagnosis, including the treatment the system had proposed. The cure required complete physical intimacy and a mutual opening of their life currents. His soul had come from outside the laws that governed her curse. According to the system, that difference would let her core restart instead of folding into the same pattern. She watched him through the explanation. Sweat ran from her temple into her hair. When he finished, she asked, "Would you have done it while I was unconscious?" "No," Kai said. The copper needles softened inside her chest. The system warned that the temporary circuit would fail in 31 minutes. She asked how certain he was that the other methods would not work. Kai showed her what he had tried. Blood exchange would give a 12% chance. Direct mana transfer offered 18% and would probably kill the donor. Removing the core would kill her before a replacement could be fitted. A partial resonance might slow the collapse for a day, but the next attack would be worse. He expected fear or anger. Instead, she asked him to turn his diagnostic sight away for a moment. Kai did not know how. He concentrated on the pale letters until they faded. The woman used the edge of the table to sit upright. Her hands trembled as she unfastened the clasp at her throat. She told him her name was Leora. She was 286 years old, which made her an adult by every law she recognized. She understood the risk. She also understood that the decision belonged to her. Kai asked one final time whether she consented. Leora placed his hand against the burning center of her chest. The pressure beneath her skin had become wild and uneven. "Yes," she said. The silver thread snapped, and dark light burst across the room. Shelves rattled. The remaining window cracked from one corner to the other. Red light escaped through the roof and flashed beneath the front door. The collectors had not left. One shouted that Oren's son had summoned a demon. Another warned the others not to touch the building until armed guards arrived. Their boots scattered down the human road, and the oldest collector promised to return after sunrise with the mortgage officer. Kai pulled Leora close to keep her from falling. Her breath hitched against his mouth. She looked at him long enough to make the choice unmistakable, then kissed him. The old lantern on the wall went out. By the time the resonance released him, dawn had reached the cracked window. Kai stood beside the stove, fastening the cuff of a clean shirt he had found in the original Kai's chest. Leora sat on the examination table, tying the cord of her coat. The room smelled of rain, burned copper, and the medicinal soap Kai had found in Oren's cupboard. He checked her pulse. The rhythm was slow and strong. The dark lines beneath her skin had vanished. When the system returned, the web around her chest flowed outward in a clean spiral. Royal core inversion resolved. Patient stable. Observation period, 72 hours. Leora drew a breath deep enough to raise her shoulders. Her mouth opened in surprise, and a laugh escaped before she could stop it. The sound was rough at first, like a voice unused for years. She pressed one hand to her chest and laughed again, this time with tears running down her face. Kai gave her a cloth and looked away while she wiped them. She told him the curse had been closing more than her core. For 40 years, each attack had stripped away another part of her emotions. Food had lost its taste. Music had become noise. She had watched friends die and understood grief only as a memory of what grief should feel like. Now, the stove smoke stung her eyes. The rain made her cold, and she found both sensations wonderful. The system left the 72-hour observation period in place and withheld any reward until the recovery remained stable. Leora's laughter faded as she straightened on the table. Her posture changed. The exhausted patient remained, but another presence settled over it, composed and heavy enough to make the small room feel smaller. She told him her full name was Leora Nox, Queen of the Demon Clans and first voice of the Heir Forest, the land humans called Forbidden. Kai stared at her broken horn. The creditors had called Oren a fraud for treating monsters. His first patient had just announced that she ruled most of them. Leora watched the thought cross his face and smiled. The expression carried more amusement than dignity. She said the morning had improved considerably. 3 measured knocks struck the front door, less than an hour after sunrise. The door still stood, although the collectors had scarred it with iron tools during the night. The rear entrance hung from one hinge behind Kai. He opened the front door to a compact woman in a dark traveling coat, 2 clerks carrying document cases, a locksmith, and 2 hired guards. One of the collectors waited behind them and refused to cross the threshold. The woman introduced herself as Mara Dorn, an officer of the lending house that held Oren Vale's mortgage. A brass counting frame hung from her belt. She looked past Kai at the broken rear entrance, the blood on the floor, and Leora's black horn. The collector began explaining that Kai had filled the clinic with demons, Mara told him she had heard the story twice on the road, and that each version had become less useful. She entered alone and asked whether the horned woman intended to attack anyone. Leora, already dressed, answered that she intended to finish a cup of hot water. Mara accepted this as a temporary declaration of peace. She inspected the clinic before discussing the debt. Rain entered through the waiting room roof. 2 walls had separated from their foundation. The medicine cabinet held more empty jars than full ones. The front door could be repaired. The forest door needed replacement. She opened the mortgage contract on Oren's desk. Oren had borrowed money for medicine, glass, coal, food, and repeated repairs. Interest increased after the local guild revoked his license. The legal balance was 300 imperial silver crowns. The collectors could demand payment, but they had no authority to seize the building that morning. Formal confiscation could begin in 21 days. Kai had no money to place on the table. Leora's crown stone could have covered the debt several times over, but selling a royal demon gem inside Eldor would bring border magistrates and temple investigators before it brought payment. Kai proposed a restructuring. He would record every fee, item of barter, and hour of labor. Mara could supervise the accounts. The clinic would make scheduled payments instead of facing immediate sale. Mara asked what income the clinic possessed. Kai looked toward his first patient. Leora's treatment was not yet complete under the system's rules, and the clinic had earned nothing. He answered that he needed 3 days to prove it. Mara gave him those 3 days as an inspection period, not as mercy. She ordered the locksmith to repair the front lock, and told the collectors that further damage would be deducted from their fee. If Kai produced no verifiable income by the end of the inspection, she would prepare the property for auction. Before noon, the forest answered Leora's return. A black mark inside her broken horn had begun glowing after the royal core recovered. The mark served as an emergency beacon, known only to her personal guard. Rauk followed it through the Veer with 6 warriors and reached the broken rear entrance, while Mara was measuring the pharmacy shelves. Rauk was an ogre nearly twice Kai's width, with gray skin, a shaved scalp, and a sword long enough to rest its hilt against his shoulder. He smelled blood and life resonance, saw the cut near Leora's collarbone, and reached for Kai before anyone explained. Leora stopped him with one word. The 2 hired guards at the front drew their short swords. Rauk's warriors raised bows at the rear. Mara stepped between the account desk and the nearest wall, protecting the mortgage papers with her own body. Leora explained that Kai had saved her life and that no one in the clinic would be harmed. Rauk lowered his hand. The human guards sheathed their swords, after Mara reminded them that their contract covered debt collection, not war with a forest queen. Mara resumed the inventory. She had arrived expecting a worthless building and a frightened debtor. By noon, she had seen a physician treat a demon queen, a royal guard obey a rule inside a human clinic, and 2 armed groups step back when the patient asked them to. An asset capable of producing that kind of restraint might be worth more alive than sold for timber. Leora remained at the clinic for 3 days because Kai refused to declare her recovered before the system's observation period ended. Rauk took up position at the broken forest entrance and watched every cup Kai handed her. Mara worked at a table near the front door and recorded every remaining bottle, chair, roof tile, and unpaid account. The clinic spent those 3 days with a human debt officer guarding one side and an ogre guarding the other. Leora had not chosen the clinic by accident. Years earlier, Oren had treated a wounded demon courier and sent him home with a message stating that the forest door would remain open to any patient. When Leora's curse entered its final stage, she followed the courier's directions, expecting to find the old healer. She found his son instead. She had left her court alone because the curse was stripping away her emotions, and she refused to let the clans watch their queen die. Leora did not offer Kai a title or a chest of treasure. The crown stone in her coat could not be sold safely in Eldor. She offered something more useful than illegal wealth. She would tell the peoples of the Veer that the old clinic treated any patient who reached its door. She would tell them that Kai had not used a helpless woman and had explained the risks before asking for consent. She would also tell them that he charged for medicine because forest peoples who had spent generations being hunted distrusted gifts that came without a price. Kai asked for one additional promise. Patients would arrive disarmed, or their weapons would remain outside. Leora agreed. She assigned Rauk to remain until the clinic could enforce the rule on its own. Rauk looked offended by the employment, but he obeyed. At the end of the 72-hour observation period, the system confirmed that Leora's recovery remained stable. It granted Kai the soul suture skill, reimbursed 9 silver crowns for materials, and restored 1 surgical room. Gears turned behind the wall. Dust fell from the ceiling, and a sealed interior door unlocked. Beyond it stood a room with whole stone walls, a smooth floor, a steel table, and cabinets holding clean bandages, needles, clamps, and glass bottles. The automatic restoration had not repaired the roof, the waiting room, either outer door, or the cold stove. It had created one place where Kai could operate safely. Mara tested all 9 coins with acid. They were pure, locally stamped, and old enough to have circulated before Oren bought the clinic. Kai explained only that the system reimbursed some material costs after a patient remained stable. He did not understand where the money came from. Mara had heard stranger claims from debtors, but verifiable currency mattered more than the explanation. She offered a formal agreement. The clinic would receive 30 days before the first scheduled payment. Every fee, item of barter, and hour of labor would be recorded at a conservative market value. Kai would take no new loan and could not sell the land. If he hid income or missed the first payment, the property would pass to the lending house. Mara would remain for the month as an asset manager. Confiscating a ruin might recover 40 crowns after demolition costs. A functioning clinic might recover the entire debt. Kai signed. Before leaving for the Heir, Leora stood in the restored surgical room and asked what he intended to build. He answered that he intended to keep the clinic open until the debt was paid. Anything beyond that depended on whether patients came. Leora glanced toward the forest and said the patients would come. She knew how many wounded creatures lived behind those trees. Rauk sent runners to the nearest forest settlements before Leora left. Her message traveled faster than Kai expected. That afternoon, a satyr with a broken ankle waited beside a human charcoal burner whose hand had been crushed under a cart. Behind them stood a hooded goblin woman holding a wicker basket that whimpered. Rauk began collecting weapons beneath the eaves. Mara closed the ledger and asked Kai where he wanted the payment desk. Kai splinted the satyr's ankle and cleaned the charcoal burner's crushed hand before opening the basket. Neither injury threatened immediate death. The sound coming from inside the wicker did. The basket contained a goblin boy named Pip. His mother, Siva, had carried him 7 miles through the rain. She was small even for a goblin, with green hands stained brown by mushroom spores. Pip was 12 and thin enough for his knees to show through his trousers. He lay curled around his abdomen, breathing in short gasps. A human healer in the nearest village had refused to examine him. A shaman from his own burrow had poured healing mana into the pain. The treatment had made the swelling worse. Kai's diagnostic site revealed 2 blind intestinal pouches where a human body would have 1 appendix. The lower pouch had ruptured. Infection spread through the abdominal cavity each time Pip moved. The system estimated 6 hours until death. Kai told Siva that surgery offered the best chance. He also told her the chance was not certain. Pip had already developed sepsis, and Kai had never operated on goblin anatomy. Siva asked how many goblins he had treated. Kai answered truthfully. Pip would be the first. Her eyes moved toward the forest, while rain hammered the repaired section of roof. With nowhere else to take her son, she agreed. Kai had a clean room and tools. He still needed a trained assistant, a proper anesthetic, and enough medicine to keep Pip alive afterward. He sent Mara to inventory every useful plant in Oren's stores. Rauk boiled water under protest. Siva produced a lump of blue mold from her basket and explained that her people used it to keep meat wounds from rotting. Kai almost dismissed it as superstition. Then, the system identified a weak antibacterial compound in the mold. He asked how she grew it. Siva said The best cultures came from cave rye kept warm beside sleeping bats. She could produce more if the boy lived. They filtered the culture through cloth, mixed it with boiled water, and used the system to determine a dose that would not poison Pip. For anesthesia, Kai combined dream moss with a measured amount of ochre spirits. Rauk objected to wasting the drink until Leora's written seal arrived with a messenger. The seal ordered him to cooperate. Rauk poured the entire bottle into Kai's measuring cup. Mara scrubbed the surgical room. She had no medical training, but she followed instructions precisely. She tied back her hair, washed to the elbows, and learned how to hold a lamp without leaning over the sterile field. Pip woke as they moved him to the table. His yellow eyes found Kai. He asked whether the doctor was going to cut him open. Kai said yes. He explained that a small part of Pip's intestine had burst and poisoned the rest of his body. Kai would remove the damaged pouches, wash the infection away, and close the opening. Pip asked whether it would hurt. Kai said the sleeping medicine would help, and the pain afterward would be treated. He did not promise that Pip would feel nothing. The boy considered that, then held out one hand. Kai thought he wanted reassurance. Pip placed a smooth red stone in his palm and told him it was payment. Siva's face tightened. The stone was a child's toy, polished from river clay. Kai set it beside the instruments and told Mara to record it as a deposit. The operation began cleanly. The first incision revealed anatomy close enough to human structure for Kai's training to matter, yet different enough to punish assumptions. Goblin muscle fibers crossed at an angle. Their blood clotted quickly, but each clot released heat that accelerated infection. Kai opened the abdominal lining and found foul fluid under pressure. Pip's pulse jumped. Mara read the numbers from the system's small monitor, though she could only see the needles, not the diagnostic text. Rauk held the boy's legs when a convulsion shook the table. Kai found the first intestinal pouch. It was swollen but intact. The system marked it as viable. The second pouch had burst along its base. Rotting tissue had glued it to a vein that carried blood from the lower bowel. Removing it too quickly would tear the vessel. Kai asked for the smallest clamp. Rauk handed him the largest. Kai forced his voice to remain level and pointed to the correct tray. Rauk's broad fingers hovered over the tools, suddenly clumsy. Mara selected the clamp and placed it in Kai's hand. The vein tore anyway, filling the wound with dark green blood. The monitor needle shivered toward the red line. Kai clamped above the tear, but the lower end retracted behind the bowel. His diagnostic sight followed it through the blood. He reached with 2 fingers, felt the vessel slide away, and caught it against the wall of the abdomen. Rauk asked whether the boy was dying. Kai said Pip was bleeding and told him to keep the legs still. He placed a second clamp, repaired the vein with silver thread, then removed the ruptured pouch in sections. Every movement had to be small. The dream moss was wearing off, and Pip's body reacted to pain even while he slept. The antibacterial mold solution was weak. Kai used it to wash the cavity, followed by saline mixed from boiled water and measured salt. He placed a drain, closed the muscle, and left the skin partly open so infection would have a path out. When the final stitch went in, Pip's pulse remained fast but steady. The system gave a survival probability of 68%. Kai stayed beside him through the night. At midnight, Pip's fever rose. Siva wanted to cover him in blankets, as goblins did during cave chills. Kai stopped her, because the heat was already dangerous. At dawn, the boy's breathing became shallow. Fluid had moved into his lungs. Kai adjusted his position, controlled the fever, and gave another small dose of the mold medicine. Mara recorded every change. Rauk carried water until the rain barrel emptied, then walked to the stream with 2 buckets in each hand. On the 4th morning, 72 hours after Pip's fever broke, he opened his eyes and asked about the red stone. Kai placed it on the blanket. The system updated. Patient stable. Reward: sterile field. Initial radius 2 meters. Reward: surgical wing blueprint. Pip stared at the pale shimmer spreading over Kai's hands. He asked whether doctors learned to do that in school. Kai said some did. Pip decided, with a certainty available only to a recovering 12-year-old, that he would become one of them. Siva fulfilled her promise. She built a warm shed behind the clinic and filled it with shelves of carefully labeled molds. Mara entered the labor at market value and reduced the debt by 3 silver crowns. The red stone remained in the cash box. Mara never assigned it a price. Breg arrived, walking under his own power. He was an old minotaur with one horn worn smooth at the tip and a leather apron stiff with soot. The muscles across his shoulders had thinned, but his hands were still blackened by forge work. He placed a small iron toy horse on the payment desk and asked whether the doctor could stop his heart from turning to stone. The system showed crystal spreading through the heart muscle. Each beat widened the fractures around it. Healing magic had accelerated the growth for years. Kai searched every route the system offered. Removing the crystal would destroy the heart. Dissolving it would poison the blood. Replacing the heart required an organ no one possessed, and a procedure the clinic could not support. The best curative probability remained 0. 5 years before the earthquake, Jihon had worked beside a crushed bus with 4 patients and 1 surgical team. He left a man with injuries no available procedure could repair, and used the remaining blood on 3 people who survived. The review board called the decision correct. The dying man had still held Ji-hoon's sleeve and asked him not to leave. Since that day, the word impossible had felt too much like a permission to abandon someone. The system offered 7 more days if Kai kept Breg sedated and forced mana through the remaining muscle. The pain would be severe. A different protocol offered 1 day with little pain and a high chance of a peaceful death. Kai asked Breg what he wanted. 1 day with my hand steady, Breg said. Enough to cast a bell for this clinic. He would use his own forge hammer in the broken chains that once marked him as property in a human mind. Kai controlled the pain while Breg worked. Rauk operated the bellows. The anvil stood on loose stones that shifted under every strike, and Breg corrected them with his boot before continuing. By sunset, his hands shook too badly to hold the tongs. Pip, still recovering, sat on a stool and passed him tools. Siva mixed cooling salve for the burns along his arms. The bell was poured before midnight. Breg died the next afternoon in the clinic garden, with the unfinished bell cooling beside him. Kai had argued with the system until every line of probability repeated. He had measured the old Minotaur's pulse long after the last beat, because his fingers refused to accept what his eyes already knew. Mara placed Oren's blue ledger in his lap. Oren had written the names of patients who died on the final pages. Kai added Breg's name beneath the others. The system gave no curative reward. It recorded successful pain control and reimbursed only the medicine used. 3 days later, Rauk hung the bell above the front door. Its first note carried into the forest and returned from the hills. Vera fell from the clouds at noon. Her shadow passed over the clinic, wide enough to cover the garden. A moment later, branches broke beyond the road. The impact shook dust from the beams and sent Pip under a table. Kai ran toward the sound with Rauk and found a silver dragon half buried in wet earth. Vera's body was longer than the clinic. One wing lay twisted beneath her. A barbed harpoon had entered behind the shoulder and disappeared nearly to the chain. Black fluid hissed where her blood touched the metal. The system divided her anatomy into layers. Dragons possessed 2 hearts, one deep in the chest and a smaller flight heart near the wing roots. The harpoon had passed within an inch of the second heart. Each movement dragged the barb across the vessel that connected them. Poison coated the head. The system could identify its effects, but not its origin. It attacked mana-carrying cells first, then forced the 2 hearts out of rhythm. Vera's main heart beat 4 times for every 3 beats of the flight heart. The mismatch was widening. Kai ordered everyone away from the chain. Vera's eye opened. The pupil narrowed to a black blade. She tried to rise, and the harpoon shifted. Blood surged from beneath the scales. Kai climbed onto a fallen tree so she could see him. He told her that another attempt would tear the connecting vessel. Vera answered through clenched jaws that hunters were following. A distant horn sounded from the western ridge. Rauk drew his sword. Human border hunters had likely fired the weapon, but the barbed head carried a stamped symbol none of them recognized. 9 curved lines surrounded a hollow circle. Kai had less than an hour to remove it, and no structure strong enough to lift the wing. Leora's messenger carried the alarm into the forest. A gray dragon arrived to donate blood, along with 2 winged attendants who circled above the ridge. They could keep the hunters away for a time. They could not move Heir without tearing the vessel. Rauk remembered a stone giant who lived near the northern quarry. The giant had not moved for months because a crack in his chest core made every step dangerous. Kai left Heir under Siva's care and ran to the quarry. Tarn sat against the cliff like a collapsed statue. Rainwater streamed through a fracture beneath his ribs. The system showed a crystal core split along an old impact line. Each movement ground the halves together. Kai had no time for a complete repair. He cleaned the crack, packed it with the same resin used to seal surgical drains, and ran silver wire around the outer plates. The temporary brace would hold for 1 day. Tarn listened, while Kai explained the dragon's condition. He asked what payment was expected. Kai told him the repair had not been complete enough to justify payment. Tarn considered this answer, then pushed himself upright. The quarry trembled. He followed Kai to the crash site. Under Tarn's direction, Rauk and the dragon attendants built a lifting frame from pine trunks, chain, and the clinic's roof beams. Mara protested only once, then entered the destroyed roof as an emergency expense. Vera's breathing grew ragged while they worked. The poison had pushed the heart ratio to 5 beats against 3. Kai used the new sterile field to clean a section between the scales. He opened the tissue around the harpoon shaft and found the barb hooked under the vessel. Pulling backward would rip it free. Pushing through would pierce the flight heart. The hunters reached the ridge before the frame was ready. Arrows struck the ground around them. One bounced from Tarn's shoulder. Rauk charged uphill with the 2 dragon attendants, forcing the hunters behind the rocks. Kai heard steel and shouting, then a burst of golden magic. A burning arrow hit the lifting frame. Mara climbed onto the beam and smothered the flame with her coat, but the chain slipped, and Vera's wing dropped 6 inches. The harpoon moved, and her flight heart stopped. The system painted the organ gray. Vieira's main heart accelerated, trying to force blood through a circuit that had lost its pump. Kai cut along the shaft. He could not wait for the perfect lift. He reached into the wound, found the barb by touch, and sawed 1 hook away with a bone blade. The second hook lay against the vessel. Tarn braced the burning frame with both hands. Cracks spread through his temporary chest repair. Mara shouted that the chain would not hold. Kai asked for 10 seconds. He placed 2 clamps around the wounded vessel and cut between them. The flight heart remained still. He pulled the harpoon head through the opening instead of back along its path. Poisoned blood poured over his gloves. The chain snapped, leaving Tarn to take the full weight of the wing. Stones split along his forearms. He sank to 1 knee, but kept the bones from crushing Kai against Vera's chest. Kai repaired the vessel, connected the donated blood, and pressed both hands over the flight heart. The system offered a new technique before he had earned it. Emergency use available. Double pulse. Temporary neural overload expected. Kai accepted, and his awareness divided. 1 part followed Vera's main heart, while the other counted the silent chambers of the flight heart. He compressed in the gap between the larger beats, forcing the smaller organ to fill without sending pressure backward. The first compression produced nothing. The second made the flight heart shudder. On the third, it contracted. The rhythm returned unevenly. 4 against 3, then 4 against 4. Vera's lungs expanded. A gust of hot air rolled over the mud. Kai closed the wound, while the battle on the ridge ended. Rauk returned with a cut across his cheek, and 1 captured hunter. The others had fled. The prisoner wore local leather and carried Eldor arrows, but the harpoon head had been purchased from a coastal broker. He knew nothing about the 9-line mark. Vera survived. Her wing healed with a ridge of silver scar tissue that prevented the full range of motion. She would fly again, though turning left would always require more space. Tarn's temporary repair failed as soon as the wing was secured. Kai spent the next day rebuilding the giant's core with resin reinforced by a sliver from one of Vera's loose scales. Tarn later replaced the clinic roof, then built a platform large enough for Vera to land without crushing the garden. 3 days after Vera's hearts remained synchronized, the system granted double pulse permanently. Using it for more than 30 seconds caused Kai's hands to shake and his vision to split. Vera offered him a scale from the scarred wing. She pressed her claw mark into a donor declaration, stating that the scale had been shed voluntarily and could not be resold for weapons. Mara found a licensed coastal trader willing to register the document with Eldor's customs office. The half sold for 118 crowns. Broker fees and border tax consumed 12. Mara placed 90 crowns against the mortgage and reserved 16 for medicine, roofing timber, and wages. She kept the other half under Vera's donor seal for surgical instruments. Elowen entered the clinic through the floor. Roots lifted the boards beneath the waiting room, and a woman with bark-patterned skin rose from the soil, as if the building had grown around her. Half the leaves in her hair were black. The rot had spread from her root network into her legs. Kai traced the infection to iron runoff from an abandoned human mine. The contaminated water fed directly into the grove where Elowen's people slept. Treatment required more than cutting away diseased roots. The mine channel had to be diverted, the soil washed, and the fungal balance restored. Siva identified 3 cave molds that consumed iron. Tarn shaped a new stream bed. Vera carried sacks of clean soil from the high valley. Kai removed the worst roots, while Elowen remained conscious. Dryads could not be sedated without slowing the trees linked to them. She gripped the sides of the stone table and corrected him whenever he mistook a sensory root for a feeding root. The work took 2 days. After Elowen remained stable for 3 days, the system restored a glass house behind the clinic. Inside, time moved differently for plants. 1 day outside produced 30 days of growth within. The acceleration affected plants and non-sentient fungi only. People working inside aged normally, and no animal or child could be placed there to mature faster. Kai saw an answer to every shortage. Bitterroot could mature in a week. Dream moss could be harvested monthly. Siva's medicinal rye could fill the shelves. He planted half their seed stock on the first day. Elowen uprooted a full tray before sunset. The accelerated soil had already developed a white crust. Tiny organisms within it were dying under the strain. Each cycle consumed mana crystals and aged the earth. If Kai kept planting at the same rate, the glasshouse would become sterile in 6 weeks. Their argument lasted until Mara arrived with the accounts. The clinic had medicine for 9 days, food for 12, and 2 usable mana crystals. Faster crops would help only if they preserved enough seed to continue after the glasshouse stopped. Elowen designed a rotation. 1/4 of the house would grow emergency medicine. 1/4 would restore nitrogen through silver clover. The remaining space would rest under fungal compost. Outside, they terraced the slope and planted ordinary fields that would take an entire season. Kai disliked the slow rows. He could see future patients arriving before the harvest. Elowen told him the soil was already a patient, and he changed the plan. The glasshouse became an emergency tool instead of a miracle that erased scarcity. Mara sold the first surplus medicines at high prices to human merchants and used the profit to buy grain, glass, and iron. Poor patients paid through labor or received treatment free. Wealthy patients paid enough to cover them. On the 30th day of Mara's agreement, she carried the ledgers, Vera's scale contract, and the first herb orders to the lending house. The creditor accepted a 2-year repayment schedule because the clinic's projected income exceeded the value of a forced auction. Kai kept the property as long as the monthly payments continued. Mara's temporary assignment ended that evening. She returned the next morning with a manager's contract and a salary deferred until the next herb sale, explaining that someone had to stop Kai from spending seed grain on bandages. The settlement began to form around the clinic. Siva built a proper culture house. Tarn raised stone foundations. Goblin families dug drainage channels. Human carpenters repaired the waiting room. Viera carried timber from places wagons could not reach. At the end of the first growing season, Mara placed the mortgage contract on Kai's desk. Her ledger showed 118 crowns from Vera's scale, 96 from medicine contracts, 67 from patient fees and valued labor, and 18 from system reimbursements. Food, wages, taxes, repairs, and replacement supplies had consumed most of that income. After cash transfers and improvements accepted by the lender were counted, the mortgage balance stood at 92 crowns. The clinic no longer faced immediate seizure, but one failed harvest or serious outbreak could still take it from him. Mara allowed no celebration yet. The first case appeared among the human builders. A human carpenter developed vomiting, fever, and a gray film along his gums. By sunset, 2 goblin children had swollen joints. The next morning, a satyr collapsed in the market, with blood running from his nose. The system gave each patient a different diagnosis. The carpenter suffered intestinal poisoning. The goblin children had a bloodstream infection. The satyr's liver was failing. All 3 contained the same unfamiliar cluster of bacteria, altered by mixed mana. Rumor moved faster than illness. Human laborers blamed Siva's mold house. Goblins said the builders had brought city plague. A group of satyrs armed themselves with pruning hooks after one of their elders died before reaching the clinic. Rauk proposed sealing the human camp. Human workers began packing their tools when they heard. If they fled toward Eldor, they would carry the infection to every village along the road. Kai ordered the road closed to everyone. Rauk reminded him that the forest clans would not accept confinement by a human doctor. Kai rang Bregg's bell until the market quieted. He explained that quarantine would follow exposure, not race. Anyone who had used the eastern well or eaten from the common kitchen would remain. Anyone who had not would still be examined before leaving. A human mason threw a cup at him. Rauk caught it before it struck. Kai pointed to the carpenter, who lay sweating on a stretcher. His wife was a goblin. Their daughter had no fever. Race did not explain the pattern. Shared water might. Mara turned the clinic's largest unfinished storeroom into a record hall. She listed every patient, meal, worksite, and water source. Pip, still too young for fieldwork, went from house to house, asking children where they played. Siva tested food stores. Elowin followed root moisture beneath the settlement. Rauk placed guards on the road and had to break up 2 fights before dusk. Kai treated what he could. The sterile field killed bacteria on surfaces, but its radius covered 1 room at a time. The mold medicine helped some patients and failed in others. The organism changed inside different bodies. By the second day, there were 43 cases. A pregnant human woman began bleeding. With no trained obstetrician in the settlement, Kai used double pulse to monitor her and the child. He stopped the contractions with a diluted root extract, then spent 2 hours draining an infected abscess near her spine. During the operation, a fire started at Siva's culture house. Someone had thrown a lamp through the window. Siva ran toward the flames because the antibacterial cultures were inside. Rauk held her back while Tarn pulled the roof away. The fire destroyed half the medicine stock. The crowd blamed a human worker. Mara found lamp oil on the ground, but no witness had seen who threw it. Kai could not spare time for revenge. He ordered the remaining cultures divided among guarded locations and reduced doses to the minimum effective amount. On the 3rd morning, Pip brought him a detail from the children. The sickest children had played in a drainage ditch behind the old well. Elowin found that the ditch joined a cracked underground channel. Waste from the human latrine, goblin compost, and satyr tannery had mixed there, then leaked into the well. Each species carried harmless organisms that became dangerous when combined with mana from the abandoned mine runoff. The clinic settlement had grown faster than its drains, and its rushed expansion had created the source. Kai closed the eastern well and used the sterile field inside its shaft until blood ran from his nose. Tarn opened the ground. Elowin redirected clean roots through the channel. Siva brewed a stronger medicine from the surviving mold, while Mara negotiated for alcohol and salt from a merchant caravan trapped outside quarantine. The merchant demanded triple price. Mara offered him free treatment for the rash the system had identified on his neck, plus exclusive rights to carry the first safe medicine shipment after quarantine. He accepted at double price. The turning point came when the satyr elder's son developed organ failure. His body rejected every drug Kai tried. The system showed that the bacteria had formed a protective mana film around his liver. Kai adapted the technique used on Leora's core. He threaded silver beneath the ribs and drew the film outward, then flooded the exposed bacteria with Siva's medicine. The boy survived. The procedure became the basis of treatment for the worst cases. By the 6th day, new infections had fallen. By the 10th, the quarantine opened. 7 people had died, and Kai wrote each name in the blue ledger. The settlement held a joint burial beyond the new drainage field. Human stone markers stood beside goblin cairns and satyr seedbeds. The pregnant carpenter Kai had treated, recovered, and carried her child to term. Her case became the first entry in the clinic's new maternal follow-up register. Mara also finished the investigation into the culture house fire. A frightened tannery apprentice had thrown the lamp after his sister became sick. He believed Siva's molds had caused the fever. Oil residue on his work gloves matched the lamp, and he confessed when the evidence was presented. The settlement had no permanent court yet, so representatives of the human workers, forest families, and clinic staff judged the case together. He was ordered to repay the damage through 1 year of supervised sanitation work and was forbidden to handle open flame during quarantine. Siva required him to spend the first month learning how the cultures had saved his sister. While sorting Oren's records afterward, Kai found a drawing of the same gray film. His father had sketched it around a black spore shaped like a broken star. Below it, Oren had written one line: "Ash from the Eastern Sea, neither living nor dead." Kai copied the page and locked the original in the restored surgical room. The Imperial Patrol arrived 2 weeks after the quarantine ended. 30 soldiers marched from the Western Road with a priest, a sealed arrest order, and enough lamp oil to burn every wooden house in the settlement. Their captain announced that Kai Vale was accused of harboring hostile creatures and spreading plague across the border. Rauk gathered the forest warriors. Viera circled above the trees. Human workers stood between their homes and the soldiers, uncertain which side would protect them if the first arrow flew. Kai walked to the clinic entrance carrying a bucket of lime wash. He painted a white line across the road. The captain told him to kneel. Kai set the brush down. Beyond this line, sick people become patients. Weapons stay outside. Anyone who comes to attack loses the clinic's protection. The priest called it demon law. Hospital law, Kai said. The captain ordered 2 soldiers forward. One crossed the line, took 3 steps, and collapsed. His body curled around a violent abdominal spasm. Gray foam appeared at his lips. The patrol had filled its water barrels from a stagnant pool downstream of the settlement, beyond the new drainage cut. White quarantine stakes had marked the bank, but the advance riders had pulled them out after deciding that monster settlers were trying to keep soldiers away from clean water. Gray fever organisms still survived in the mud, even though the wells were safe. The soldier had a fast version of the same mixed infection. The priest began a healing chant. Kai stopped him before the mana could accelerate the bacteria. The captain drew his sword. Rauk moved behind Kai, and every forest bow on the ridge came level. Kai looked at the fallen soldier. His blood pressure was dropping. The antibacterial stock would not work until the protective film around his bowel was removed. Kai stepped across the white line toward the patrol. The captain warned him not to approach. Kai answered that the man would die in minutes. The soldier's closest friend lowered his spear first. The captain allowed Kai through. Kai worked on the road with Mara holding the medicine case and Pip passing instruments. He inserted a silver tube through the abdominal wall, guided it around the infected loop of bowel, and discharged a narrow sterile field through the metal. The effort burned the skin along his forearm. The gray foam stopped. The soldier's breathing eased enough for him to speak. Kai told the patrol that he was stabilized, not cured. The entire unit had been exposed and needed quarantine. The captain looked at the armed forest behind the clinic, then at his soldier gripping Kai's sleeve. He ordered the weapons stacked outside the line. The patrol remained for 6 days. No one was arrested. The priest spent most of that time helping Siva boil bandages, after Kai showed him bacteria through a lens made from Vera's scale. When the soldiers left, they carried a report that the settlement contained no invasion force. They also carried a second report stating that monsters and humans had obeyed the same quarantine. Leora arrived before sunset and placed the seal of the Veer Forest on a stone beside the White Line. She declared the clinic and its immediate grounds neutral territory under forest law. Kai warned her that the Empire had not agreed. Leora said the Empire had 6 days of witness testimony and 1 living soldier it would otherwise have buried. The lime line faded under boots and rain, so residents repainted it. Travelers began referring to the settlement as the place at the White Boundary. Mara needed a legal name for market permits and entered White Boundary in the first municipal ledger. The name remained. The charcoal burner whose hand Kai had treated repaired the old wall lantern. Its light became the last one visible on the human road before the trees closed around it. Patients began calling the original clinic the Last Lantern. Mara's original 1-month contract had ended long before. She stayed because the clinic paid her a fixed salary from market income. And because no one else could stop 1 crate of herbs, 6 hours of labor, and a promise of future dragon scales from being counted as the same payment. By the final month of the first year, winter medicine orders, treatment fees, legal herb sales, and recorded construction labor cleared the remaining 92 crowns and the final interest charge. Mara drew a line through the balance, only after the lending house stamped the release. Bregg's bell rang 12 times because Pip climbed the doorframe and refused to come down until everyone heard that the mortgage had been cleared. That evening, a lean man in a merchant's coat joined the next caravan. He introduced himself as Cassian Rowe and claimed to trade in salt, glass, and medical spirits. He counted the dragon platforms before he looked at the market stalls. When he coughed into a handkerchief, he folded the blood inward so no one would see. The system saw through the cloth. By the end of the first year, the clinic had 3 new wings, 120 permanent residents, and an imperial spy sleeping above the bakery. Cassian presented himself as a trader seeking rare medicines, and his papers survived Mara's inspection. The calluses across his thumb and forefinger came from years of drawing a military bow. A pale line under his left ear showed where an officer's identification seal had been removed with acid. The mud on his boots belonged to the northern road, although he claimed to have arrived from the south. When he smiled at Mara, he checked the roofline behind her. Kai let him finish the lie. Then he asked how long Cassian had been coughing glass. Cassian's expression remained pleasant, but his right hand drifted closer to the knife beneath his coat. He said the red crystals came from cheap pipe leaf. Kai placed a clean dish on the table and asked him to cough into it. Cassian refused, so Kai described what the system saw through his chest. Thin crystalline colonies lined both lungs. Each breath broke fragments from their edges, producing small internal cuts. The growth had already reached the vessels near his heart. If he rode hard in cold air, one colony would fracture and fill a lung with blood. Cassian sat down while the pleasant expression left his face. The disease came from a border mine where imperial laborers extracted luminous stone. Cassian had investigated missing tax shipments there 2 years earlier. A tunnel collapse exposed him to dust. Court healers used restoration spells, which closed the cuts around the crystals and trapped them deeper. He did not explain why a supposed traitor had access to a restricted mine. Kai did not ask yet. Treatment required blue salt to weaken the mineral, a fermented enzyme to dissolve the organic shell around each colony, and a dry sap that would prevent the lung tissue from collapsing when the crystals came loose. Cassian had brought blue salt among his trade samples. Siva could produce the enzyme. Elowin had the sap, but only from trees in their winter sleep. She refused to cut them awake. Cassian offered gold. Elowin pointed toward the ordinary herb terraces and told him that coin did not replace a dead tree. Kai supported her. The accelerated garden could grow a young sapling quickly, but its sap would be chemically immature. They needed another source. Rauk remembered a grove damaged by lightning the previous spring. Elowin found 3 trees already dying. She permitted one careful harvest after Kai treated their burned roots to keep infection from spreading. The delay cost Cassian 2 days. During that time, he wandered through White Boundary under the excuse of assessing trade. He saw no barracks. He saw an ogre teaching human workers how to brace a timber arch. He found dragon scales stored behind 3 locks, with each scale recorded in Mara's ledger by date, weight, donor, and legal use. He found hunters cleaning weapons, but their lists named medicinal resin, shed antlers, venom from non-intelligent marsh serpents, and fungus from abandoned caves. The rules forbade harvesting the core of any intelligent creature. He also found a map of the Imperial border on Rauk's wall. Cassian stood before it for a long time. Colored pins marked roads, wells, and villages. He assumed it was an invasion plan, until Rauk explained that every pin represented a place where an injured patient could be collected. Heir had begun testing emergency flight routes. Cassian asked how many fighters the forest could field. Rauk answered with a number large enough to make the spy's face tighten. Then, the ogre added that most of them preferred hunting, farming, or sleeping to war, which was why sensible men should stop giving them reasons to unite. Siva's enzyme took 3 failed batches. The first dissolved healthy tissue in a rabbit liver, obtained from the butcher. The second turned inactive when mixed with blue salt. On the 3rd attempt, she fermented the fungus at a lower temperature, inside the edge of the accelerated garden, where 1 hour replaced more than a day. Kai poured the finished liquid into a ceramic inhaler. Cassian breathed through a reed while heated vapor carried the medicine into his lungs. Pain hit within seconds, and he bent over the table, coughing so hard that blood sprayed the dish. Red crystal splinters followed. One lodged in his airway. Kai used double pulse to monitor both lungs while guiding a thin hook through the reed. His own heart stumbled after 25 seconds. He released the skill, trusted the rhythm he had memorized, and removed the fragment by hand. Cassian drew a full breath. The sound was clear enough to change his face. He had lived with a weight inside his chest for 2 years. Now, air reached places he had forgotten. The visible effect was immediate, but the disease was not gone. Kai prescribed 7 days of inhalation, controlled breathing, and rest. Scar tissue would remain. Cassian would never tolerate mine dust or smoke again. During the week, he stopped pretending to be a traitor. He kept his mission secret and helped Mara identify forged Imperial coins in the market. He also corrected the clinic's estimate of military road traffic. Mara accepted the information while keeping him away from the ledgers. On the last day, Cassian asked why Kai had treated a spy. Kai said that being a spy did not make Cassian less sick. Cassian almost laughed, then coughed out the final grain of crystal. After his lungs remained stable for 72 hours, the system granted Kai anatomical line. For several seconds, it could reveal the safest cutting plane through a diagnosed obstruction, tissue layer, or constructed mechanism. Kai could spend additional energy to open a scalpel-thin incision along that plane, though unknown material or a moving target could still throw the cut off course. He returned to the capital with a report that changed the Empire's response. White Boundary possessed dangerous allies and unusual magic, but it had no invasion plan. Its founder had treated Imperial soldiers during an epidemic, paid his legal debts, and enforced rules that protected humans as firmly as monsters. Cassian warned that attacking the clinic would create the army the Empire feared. Emperor Aldrich read the report twice. The court expected him to send diplomats. Instead, 2 months later, a plane carriage arrived at White Boundary after midnight. The man who stepped out wore the coat of a wealthy landowner. He was broad-shouldered, dark-haired, and careful with his left knee. His wife carried herself with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to a room changing when she entered it. A third traveler, Reincarnated, introduced himself as their private physician and looked at the clinic with open disapproval. 6 trusted Imperial riders waited out of sight in an abandoned charcoal camp, close enough to answer Cassian's signal, but far enough to preserve the visit's secrecy. Cassian came inside with the travelers. That was enough to reveal the truth. Kai bowed to Emperor Aldrich and Empress Selena in the empty reception room. Mara locked the outer doors. Liora was summoned from the forest, but remained out of sight until the imperial couple chose to reveal their visit publicly. Aldrich had no child after 11 years of marriage. The court had begun dividing around distant cousins. Several noble houses urged him to set Selena aside or take another wife. He had refused both. Each refusal cost political support. Varen had tested the Empress repeatedly and found no clear cause. He had treated the Emperor with strengthening tonics, warming spells, bloodletting, and expensive aphrodisiacs. Nothing produced a lasting result. Aldrich described the problem in the tone of a commander discussing grain supply. His ears reddened anyway. Kai examined both spouses separately and kept their records sealed. Selena's reproductive health was normal. Stress had disrupted some cycles, but conception remained possible. Aldrich's condition had 4 causes. Heavy metals from the court tonics had damaged hormone production. The imperial seal worn at his belt released constant heat into the lower mana channels. Poor sleep and years of political strain narrowed his blood vessels. The latest aphrodisiac produced brief arousal by forcing the heart, then worsened circulation for days. Varen rejected the diagnosis, so Kai asked for the Emperor's tonic cup. He added a clear reagent from Siva's laboratory. A dark line formed in the liquid. He heated a drop of tonic on glass. Metallic beads remained after the herbs burned away. Varen's anger shifted toward himself. He had inherited the formula from 3 generations of court physicians. Every test available at the palace judged it pure because the metal was considered a sacred mineral, not a contaminant. Kai asked Varen to help design the treatment and kept the error out of every conversation beyond the room. The first phase required removing metal slowly enough to avoid kidney failure. Eloin supplied a root that bound to the contaminant. Siva produced a fungus membrane that could survive the stomach and dissolve in the intestine. The membrane became a simple capsule, allowing precise doses and hiding a taste strong enough to make Rauk spit across the yard during testing. The second phase restored damaged vessels. The third reduced heat in the mana channels. Aldrich had to stop wearing the Imperial seal at his waist and sleep at least 7 hours for 42 nights. He considered the sleep requirement less realistic than magic. Kai named the course Red Dawn after the color of the capsules. Mara insisted that each dose be numbered and recorded. Varen recalculated every amount for the Emperor's weight and mana density. The first capsule contained a small additional ingredient to improve circulation. Kai warned Aldrich that its effect could be rapid. During dinner that evening, Aldrich set down his spoon, looked at Selena, and ended the meal much earlier than protocol allowed. Selena's attempt to maintain a dignified expression lasted until the door closed behind them. The moment became a private joke among the 5 people who knew. No servant heard the diagnosis from Kai. The imperial couple left before dawn on the 5th day with 42 numbered doses and written instructions. Varen supervised the course in the capital and sent sealed reports through Cassian. He also withdrew the old strengthening tonic from the palace pharmacy and distributed Kai's metal test to provincial physicians. Aldrich hated the restricted diet, disliked sleeping without the seal, and tried twice to reduce the cleansing dose because it caused headaches. Selena enforced the plan more effectively than any guard. 2 months after their departure, a letter under Selena's personal seal confirmed that she was pregnant. The news did not become public for another season. When the court finally announced it, Aldrich returned openly to White Boundary with banners, soldiers, and enough noble witnesses to make denial impossible. The heavy metal had cleared. The damaged vessels had recovered, and the lower mana channels remained cool, even when Aldrich wore the Imperial seal at his chest instead of his belt. After the follow-up remained stable for 72 hours, the system granted Kai Pulse Clamp. The skill could interrupt blood, mana, or nerve flow through a diagnosed channel for 3 heartbeats. Holding it longer risked a violent rebound in the patient and an irregular pulse in Kai's own chest. Aldrich offered Kai a title, an estate, and a position as royal physician. Accepting would have solved every financial problem, yet it would also have placed the clinic beneath imperial authority and made every forest patient dependent on the favor of one human throne. Kai declined the title and asked instead for a charter recognizing White Boundary as neutral medical territory, free passage for patients, protection for intelligent forest peoples near the clinic, and trained workers who could build glassware, drains, roads, and classrooms. Aldrich could grant imperial recognition. He could not command Leora's forest. The negotiations lasted 12 days. Leora refused any charter that described forest peoples as imperial guests. Aldrich refused a document that allowed an armed demon enclave inside his border. Mara rejected both drafts because neither defined taxes. Cassian found 6 ways each side could exploit the quarantine clauses. Rauk objected to a proposed limit on armed hunters, while human settlers wanted assurance that Leora's warriors could not enter their homes. Kai spent more time in meetings than in surgery and discovered that politics produced a different kind of fever. The final agreement used 2 guarantees. Aldrich appointed Cassian as the Empire's permanent liaison to White Boundary. The charter placed him under the White Code while he lived inside the city, which meant he could report to the Emperor but could not conduct arrests or searches without local authority. Mara assigned him an office beside the customs desk, where she could see who entered it. The Empire recognized White Boundary as a self-governed medical city. The Heir forest recognized the same ground as a protected healing sanctuary. Neither ruler owned it. The city could maintain guards, but not an offensive army. Imperial and forest law applied outside its marked land. Inside, the White Code governed treatment, trade, and public safety. Taxes were paid as a fixed annual amount to both borders in exchange for roads, patrol coordination, and legal trade. Mara calculated the payment from market revenue, not patient fees, so emergency care remained possible. Leora secured the term intelligent peoples in place of monsters. Aldrich added the right to expel anyone who carried an unsheathed weapon into the medical district, regardless of rank. Kai made diagnosis records the property of the patient. They signed beneath Bregg's bell, while residents crowded the road. White Boundary raised no national flag. A white cloth marked with a simple open door flew over the clinic. The city grew faster after recognition than anyone had planned. Stonecutters arrived with Tarn's quarry crews. Human glassworkers built furnaces along the western road. A Talisar specialist named Syra Ven offered kiln plans that produced stronger laboratory bottles and sold the hospital its first sample flasks at half-market price. Goblin families settled near Siva's mushroom vaults. A group of centaurs opened a transport company. Harpies carried letters. Minotaurs expanded the smithy around Bragg's old forge design. Aldrich sent teachers, engineers, and surveyors instead of soldiers. Mara refused to let migration outrun water a second time. New building permits stopped whenever the granaries held less than 1 winter of reserve. Tarn completed an aqueduct, 2 sewage rings, and 3 public cisterns before the Eastern Housing District opened. The council counted residents by food requirement as well as headcount, because a centaur family and a goblin family did not consume the same amount of grain. White Boundary became the only legal crossing between Eldor and the Vir on the continent of Astera. Caravans used the city because its courts recognized contracts signed by humans and forest peoples alike. Growth produced profit and waste in equal measure. Mara created a land rent based on building size and water use. Market stalls paid daily fees. Wealthy patients funded private rooms. The city purchased grain from imperial farms rather than wasting the accelerated garden on cheap food. Rare medicines grown there were sold at high prices, and part of the income supported free treatment. Eloin limited the field to 3 cycles before 6 weeks of recovery. When merchants offered enough money to double production, she locked its crystal housing and put the key inside her bark. Kai supported her after seeing the salt stains left by a 4th experimental cycle. The decision cost immediate revenue. It preserved the field for the war none of them yet knew was coming. Leora spent 2 evenings each week in the council room as the city grew. After the disputes ended, she often joined Kai in the empty pharmacy, where he counted doses while she repaired reports with her own cramped handwriting. Their conversations moved from border law to music, food, and the habits each found strange in the other's people. Rauk began setting 1 shared evening meal on the work table and claiming the kitchen had miscounted again. 3 years after Kai's arrival, White Boundary held almost 7,000 residents. That spring, Varen sent word that Selena had given birth to a healthy son, Prince Lucen. Breg's bell rang for him at noon, and the healthy birth became public proof that the imperial treatment had succeeded. By then, the city's center was no longer a repaired house. The last lantern, as people now called the old clinic, stood beside a stone hospital with separate wards for bodies that breathed air, water, smoke, or mana. Vieira led an emergency flight service. Her injured wing limited long journeys, so she trained younger dragons to carry padded rescue frames rather than riders. Tarn designed courtyards that could bear a giant's weight. Siva ran fermentation rooms where temperature and contamination were recorded on slate. Rauk commanded the Grey Path Hunters, whose task was to gather ingredients, escort patients, and map dangerous regions. The School of Healers opened in Orin Vale's name. Varen Kest left the Imperial Court for half of each year to teach human anatomy. He and Kai still argued over methods. Varen believed knowledge needed order before experimentation. Kai believed a perfect lesson delivered too late could bury a patient. Their students learned from both. Pip became the school's youngest trainee. On the first day, Varen placed a human anatomy text on the lectern. Pip raised his hand and asked which of his 2 intestinal pouches the diagram had forgotten. Vera, listening through an open wall, added that the heart count was also wrong. Tarn wanted to know why the skeleton was made from such fragile material. By the end of the week, the school had separate basic charts for 9 species, and blank pages reserved for the next patient who proved them incomplete. Kai's greatest adjustment was accepting that expertise did not spread merely because he spoke. He knew trauma surgery. Siva knew fermentation better. Elowen understood living soil. Varen had years of obstetric and internal medicine experience. Mara could see how a generous policy would bankrupt the pharmacy in a month. Rauk knew which forest paths changed after rain. Ignoring those limits soon cost him. He once ordered the accelerated garden to produce a rare fever herb before Elowen finished preparing the soil. The harvest looked perfect and contained half the active medicine. A patient's fever worsened until Siva noticed the weak taste. Kai suspended the batch, reported the failure publicly, and paid for replacement medicine from his own share of clinic income. The system had shown healthy plants. It had not measured the compound he needed because he had asked the wrong question. That lesson returned when the first sleeper fell. During the final months of the 4th year, a young Wolfkin mason collapsed while carrying roof tiles and became the first sleeper. His heart continued beating. His lungs worked. His eyes reacted to light, yet no pain or voice could wake him. The system found a dark red lattice wrapped around the mana channels behind his skull. It looked artificial, too regular for a natural curse, and it drew energy from every attempt to heal it. A second Wolfkin fell before Kai finished the examination. By sunset, 11 patients filled the new coma ward. All were intelligent forest peoples. A human porter who had shared lunch with the first mason remained healthy. So did the human woman who slept beside an affected satyr. Tests found the same red dust on their clothes and beneath their nails, but no lattice in their bodies. The pattern spread panic through the city. Rumors claimed humans had brought a weapon. A human baker woke to find a black handprint painted across his door. Forest workers left mixed neighborhoods and gathered near Leora's embassy. Human families moved toward the western gate, where Imperial guards waited outside the neutral district. Leora demanded immediate separation of every human resident until the source was known. Fear for her people drove the proposal. Once Raup's guards began closing streets, frightened residents experienced it as punishment. Mara stood in the council chamber with a stack of housing records and warned that 2,500 humans could not be confined without food, toilets, and armed resistance. Cassian added that Imperial troops would cross the boundary if citizens sent word that demons had imprisoned them. Leora asked whether they should wait for more of her people to collapse. Kai examined the evidence again. Humans carried particles on their clothes. That did not prove they had released them. Locking them together might concentrate the source if it traveled with imported goods. He proposed exposure zones instead of racial confinement. Anyone who had entered the southern warehouse district would remain where they were. Movement between districts would stop. Food and water would pass through monitored gates. The rule applied to every species. Leora accepted for 12 hours. If the number doubled, she would seal the human quarter. The count doubled in 9 hours. The coma ward overflowed. Vira carried 2 affected harpies from the eastern ridge. A minotaur collapsed at the forge and fell against a molten trough. Rauk pulled him free, burning both forearms. Elowin reported that 3 dryads had lost contact with their outer roots and would die if their consciousness did not return. Kai tried to separate the lattice from the first patient. Anatomical line marked a safe cutting plane for less than a second, but the target shifted before he could open it. Soul Suture followed the structure along the mana channels, where it retreated and rebuilt behind his sight. When he increased pressure, it attached itself to the patient's core. The system offered no established treatment. It labeled the condition as an unknown constructed pathogen. Kai broadened his scan to include the entire ward. Pain drove through his right eye. Double pulse allowed him to compare 2 patients, then 4, then 8, as he pushed beyond the skill's safe limit. He found one variation. Patients who had consumed food from the Western market carried less of the lattice than those who worked near the new glass furnaces. Blood ran from his nose. Leora took his chin in one hand and forced him to stop. He tried to turn back toward the beds. His left leg failed under him. Varen and Pip continued the examinations while Kai lay in a dark room with cold cloth over his eyes. Pip had not inherited the system. He used ordinary questions. He asked families where the patients worked, what dust clung to their boots, and which shops they visited. Mara matched the answers to cargo records. Cassian traced the routes of wagons. Siva cultured every powder collected from the streets. Elowin tested whether roots carried it through soil. Every trail led to the new glass district. Syra then had arrived from the sea 6 months earlier, with kiln designs that produced stronger laboratory bottles. She was lean, brown-skinned, and precise in every movement. Since selling the hospital its first sample flasks, she had managed imports of white sand from the island continent of Talisar. The latest shipment had arrived in sealed blue crates. Several had cracked in the southern warehouse. Fine red dust mixed with the sand and spread through the furnaces, workshops, and market bottles. Syra had entered every affected building, yet her body carried no lattice. Kai went to her room with Cassian and Leora. Syra opened the door before they knocked. A travel bag sat packed on the bed. 3 empty vials lay in the wash basin. The system identified traces of a preventive drug in her blood. Syra did not attempt to run. She explained that she served the Epidemiological Bureau of Talisar and had entered White Boundary to study whether mixed species settlement increased the risk of magical disease. Every foreign field agent received a monthly protective tonic. She had not been told that the glass shipment carried a live trial. The seal inside her bureau case showed 9 curved lines around a hollow circle. Kai recognized the mark, stamped into the harpoon that had nearly killed Vira. Syra identified it as the emblem of a military contractor attached to the sacred engine. The coastal broker had not sold a random foreign weapon. Talisar had been testing Astera, the continent shared by Eldor and the Vare Forest, since the first year. Leora's shadow pinned her against the wall. Syra admitted that the red lattice resembled a military project known in Talisar as Crimson Sleep. White Boundary had already begun calling the outbreak Red Sleep. Human bodies did not provide enough core energy for it to activate. They became carriers. Creatures with dense mana cores entered coma, while the lattice copied their energy pattern. Kai asked for the antidote. There was none. Talisar's researchers stopped their own test cases with a control frequency generated by a machine at home. The field weapon had been designed to remain dependent on that signal. Syra possessed the mathematical pattern, but White Boundary had no machine capable of reproducing it. Leora wanted her executed. Rauk, arms wrapped from the forge burns, agreed. Cassian argued that killing their only knowledgeable witness would protect whoever had ordered the attack. Kai asked Syra whether she knew the cargo was contaminated when it arrived. She said no. The system could not judge truth. Kai watched her hands instead. She kept looking toward the coma ward through the window. Her left thumb rubbed the place where a ring had once been. Fear tightened her breathing whenever Leora moved, yet she did not ask for mercy. Kai placed her under guard and took her to the laboratory. The lattice had 3 components. A mineral frame allowed it to survive outside a body. A mana pattern recognized dense cores. A living fungal film copied the pattern after infection. Siva could attack the film. Elowin could weaken the mineral frame. The mana pattern remained. Syra proposed using a donor core as bait, drawing every lattice into one body and destroying it with concentrated light. The system calculated the result. A sufficiently powerful donor could attract the infection from the entire city. Leora's recovered royal core was ideal. Survival probability for the donor was 3%. Kai rejected the plan before Leora heard it. Pip noticed something in samples from 7 patients. The lattice changed shape according to species. In a goblin, it wrapped around rapid metabolic channels. In a dragon, it divided between 2 hearts. In a dryad, it extended into the roots. Each adaptation made it more efficient and less stable outside that anatomy. Kai realized they did not need one core strong enough to attract every variant. They needed many small immune signals, each shaped by a different body. The city asked for volunteers. Viera donated blood from the flight vessel. Rauk allowed a sliver to be taken from the outer layer of his mana core. Siva provided liver fluid. Elowin gave living root sap. A human porter, a satyr, and a minotaur completed the first 7 patterns. The collection was painful and carried risk. Kai explained each procedure in public before anyone signed consent. Syra converted the control frequency into a sequence of mana pulses. Varen designed a safe transfusion schedule. Siva grew the fungal carriers in the accelerated garden, where 20 days of culture passed before nightfall. Elowin protested when Kai requested a second cycle without rest. He showed her the number of patients whose core activity was fading. She allowed 1 additional cycle, then ordered Tarn to dismantle the crystal housing afterward, so no desperate official could force a third. The first composite antidote failed. The Wolfkin Mason's lattice broke apart, then reformed around his heart. His pulse slowed to 3 beats per minute. Kai withdrew the dose and kept him alive by moving mana through the core manually. Syra found the error. The human signal had been placed last in the sequence. Because humans acted as carriers, their immune pattern needed to open the lattice before the other species disrupted it. The second dose shattered half the structure. The remaining fragments attacked the nerves that controlled breathing. Pip inserted a breathing tube, while Kai held the patient's core stable. Varen adjusted the pulse interval by the length of a goblin heartbeat. Siva changed the fungal shell so it dissolved closer to the brain. The third dose worked, and the lattice loosened from the Wolfkin's channels and collapsed into harmless red dust. He woke coughing, confused by the 12 people leaning over his bed. Production began before he finished asking what happened. The accelerated garden grew carrier cultures. Siva's workers fermented them in shifts. Human glassmakers, many of whom had been accused that morning, made sealed ampules. Vera delivered doses to the forest. Mara organized payment from the emergency reserve and froze market prices to stop merchants from hoarding ingredients. A group of human residents attacked a quarantine gate after hearing that Leora planned to sacrifice them for an antidote. Rauk met them with armored guards. Stones flew. One guard raised a spear. Cassian stepped between the lines and read the treatment order aloud. It named human volunteers first among the donors and stated that no person would be used without consent. Mara brought the signed ledger. Siva carried the first awakened goblin child into the street. The crowd lowered its weapons, one by one. For 4 days, the city worked as a single production line. 27 patients required breathing support. 3 dragon patients needed both hearts paced separately. Elowin remained rooted beside the Dryad ward, passing the antidote underground where needles could not reach. Kai treated patients until the system warnings became unreadable. He began mistaking one heartbeat for another. On the 4th night, he reached for a dose meant for a minotaur while standing beside a goblin. Pip caught his wrist. The boy who had once paid with a red stone checked the label, selected the correct ampule, and told Kai to lie down. Kai obeyed. The final sleeper woke on the 7th day. 11 patients died. Their names entered the Blue Book. Hundreds survived with weakness, memory gaps, or damaged mana channels that required months of rehabilitation. After 6 weeks of soil recovery, Tarn rebuilt the Garden of 30 Seasons housing with 3 separate locks. Elowin, Mara, and Siva each held 1 key, and any future cycle required 2 of them to agree. Syra remained in custody. Her information had saved the city. Her silence, before the outbreak, had also allowed the contaminated shipment to enter. White Boundaries Council postponed judgment until they could prove who had ordered the trial. The proof waited in a sealed compartment inside Oren Vale's study. The original Kai had died trying to reach the study. His body's memory guided the new Kai to a warped floorboard beneath the desk. Under it lay a key made from black crystal. The key reacted to residue from the Crimson Sleep and opened a compartment in the wall. A note inside the lock explained Oren's precaution. He wanted the research opened only by someone who had already encountered the artificial ash and could recognize the danger as real. Inside were Oren's field journals, an Imperial identification badge, and a lens etched with the same moving symbols Kai saw around curses. Oren had not begun his career as a village healer. He had served as an Imperial epidemiologist during outbreaks along the eastern coast. 12 years earlier, he discovered artificial ash in the lungs of miners and monster hunters. The material came from engines built on the other continents. His journals described 3 ancient medical modules created after a worldwide monoplague 9 centuries ago. The first module diagnosed corruption in bodies and the land. It had been hidden in Astera after the old order collapsed. The second sterilized dangerous magical structures. Solkar placed it inside the solar choir and turned its focused light into religious authority and military power. The third circulated mana through damaged regions. Talisar built its sacred engine around the module and learned to extract energy from living cores. The modules had once worked together like parts of a physician's kit. Separated, they grew dangerous. Solkar's cleansing power destroyed healthy life along with infection. Talisar's engine drew more energy than the world's network could replace. The Forbidden Forests formed part of the world's immune system through their roots, cores, and migrating beasts. Intelligent forest peoples had grown around that function over centuries. Every core taken for industry weakened the same network that controlled mutation and disease. Oren presented the evidence to Imperial officials. The Empire feared war with Talisar and religious conflict with Solkar. His research was sealed. The Medical Guild stripped his license after he continued treating forest peoples and warning border villages. He moved to the abandoned clinic because the hidden diagnostic module lay beneath it. Oren could access only fragments. He lacked the foreign soul signature required to activate the complete system. His journals suggested that the ancient builders had designed that lock to prevent any local ruler from claiming all 3 modules through bloodline or conquest. The black ash slowly infected him. He spent his final years buying medicine, bribing guards, and containing outbreaks that the Empire dismissed as monster sickness. The original Kai inherited a dormant spore from caring for him. On the night he died, his blood activated the clinic module. The activation neutralized the spore and repaired the failing organs, but the original soul had already departed. The system preserved the body for several minutes and searched beyond the world's registered soul network for a compatible healer, dying at the same moment. It found Kang Ji-hoon beneath a collapsed operating room. Kai sat on the study floor until the lamp burned low. He had known the original owner of the body was gone. Knowing how and why made the borrowed hands feel heavier. The young Kai had died alone, crawling toward the truth his father left behind. Ji-hoon had received the body, the system, and a second life because that boy failed to reach a door by a few feet. Leora found him there, and Kai showed her the journals. He expected questions about the modules and the forests. She read the page describing the original Kai first. She asked what name he wanted her to use. He answered Kai Vale. The dead young man had carried Oren's work to the threshold, and Ji-hoon chose to preserve the name attached to that effort. When Kai touched the diagnostic lens, the system opened a message hidden since Oren's death. Planetary septic chain diagnosed. Protocol completion. 12%. Primary task. Restore circulation between the 3 continental modules before systemic collapse. The system had never been a private gift. Every reward had expanded the capacity of a field hospital, positioned over the first module. Oren's inventories also explained the material payments. Silver came from a finite emergency vault beneath the clinic, while automatic repairs consumed old stores of stone, metal, glass, and mana. White Boundary was becoming the team required for a treatment no individual could perform. Kai spent the next days reviewing every building for exposure, examining every surviving patient, and trying to scan the underground route network. The wider scan struck him like a hammer. He woke in his office, with his right eye swollen shut, and no feeling below his left knee. Leora sat beside the bed. She held the system lens in one hand. She had removed it from the study before he could try again. Kai reached for it. Leora moved it beyond his grasp. She said that he treated his own body as a tray of instruments. When one broke, he expected someone else to place a new one in his hand. Kai argued that the world network was failing, and the 2 other modules had become weapons. Waiting would not improve the diagnosis. Leora leaned closer. Her broken horn cast a thin shadow across his face. "Do you ever look at me and see Leora?" she asked. "Or has everyone become a condition you need to manage?" Kai's hand stopped halfway to the lens. He dismissed the system display. The amber light around Leora's core vanished from his sight. He saw the pale scar beneath her collarbone, the tired crease between her brows, and a loose thread at the cuff she had repaired badly. Her fingers still held the lens too tightly. Kai apologized for hiding behind work when fear became difficult to name. He admitted that the underground tremors felt like the hospital floor in his last moments on Earth. Every warning from the system told him another ceiling was coming down, and his first instinct was still to hold one clamp alone. Leora set the lens aside. Their first kiss had been a treatment chosen under the pressure of death. Kai kept the diagnostic site closed while Leora kissed him because she wanted to. He answered only after recognizing the same desire in himself. When they separated, she pressed her forehead to his and told him the system could wait until morning. He slept for 10 hours. Kai sent copies of Oren's journals, sample records, and the old Imperial badge to Aldrich. The Emperor reopened the guild case under public review. The evidence proved that Oren's forbidden treatments had contained border epidemics the guild had failed to recognize. His medical license was restored after death. The fraud judgment was withdrawn, and the bribes in his ledger were reclassified as unauthorized emergency passage fees rather than personal theft. The ruling did not return Oren to life or erase the years his son had spent under the name of a fraud. It allowed the school above the clinic door to bear his name without qualification. Syra decoded the shipping records while under guard. The contaminated glass had not come from an epidemiological bureau. It had passed through a military warehouse controlled by the office of Marvek San, first chancellor of the Talisar League. The cargo was a test. White Boundary had been selected because its population allowed the weapon to collect patterns from more intelligent species than any laboratory could hold. Syra's discovery reached the council on a morning when Varen's latest letter arrived from the capital. Prince Lucen had taken his first steps, knocked over an inkstand, and left a blue handprint on an imperial decree. Brig's small iron horse stood above the entrance to White Boundary's new children's ward. His bell rang at noon when the doors opened. At sunset, every mirror in the council chamber turned white. A man in gold robes appeared across their surfaces. Solon Ark, High Prelate of Solkar, spoke through the solar choir from a continent beyond the southern sea. His image came with the smell of hot stone and incense. A second figure formed beside him. Marvek San wore a plain dark coat and metal rings around each finger. Behind him, blue energy moved through pipes as thick as tree trunks. They delivered separate demands under a single seal. Solkar required the destruction of the Forbidden Forest's central root network, which its doctrine identified as the source of magical plague. Leora and the forest rulers were to surrender. Human residents would be evacuated for purification. Kai would submit the diagnostic module to the Solar Choir. Talisar required control of the Garden of 30 Seasons, access to all research on mixed species cores, legal rights to harvest non-human mana organs, and ownership of the diagnostic system. In exchange, the Alliance promised to spare the human cities of Astera. Marvek described White Boundary as an unstable experiment. Humans sharing law with demons proved that Eldor's emperor could no longer distinguish civilization from infection. Solon appeared less cold. He spoke of an epidemic that had killed a third of one Solkar province when he was a child. He believed mixed cores and uncontrolled forest magic would produce another. His fear was sincere enough to make him more dangerous. Aldrich joined the Mirror Conference from the capital. He rejected the evacuation and declared an attack on White Boundary, an attack on the Empire. Leora rejected surrender. Shadows spread over the chamber walls, darkening Solon's image. Kai asked whether either ruler had examined Orin's evidence that core harvesting caused the instability they feared. Marvek said the industrial survival of Talisar could not depend on the theories of a disgraced provincial healer. Solon called the forests a diseased organ, whose removal had been delayed by cowardice. Kai offered independent inspection, shared epidemic data, and a controlled demonstration of the diagnostic module. Marvek demanded ownership before inspection. Solon demanded purification before negotiation, and the mirrors went dark. White Boundary's council divided over what to do next. Some human merchants wanted the city dissolved before war began. Several forest chiefs urged Leora to strike imperial ports suspected of supplying the foreign fleets. Rauk argued for mining the Western Road. Mara warned that doing so would trap patients and destroy trade before the enemy arrived. Kai proposed preparing the city as a hospital under siege rather than a fortress seeking battle. Food stores would be expanded. Natural fields would replace export herbs. Quarantine walls would be reinforced. Greypath hunters would map landing sites. Veyra's rescue service would train for evacuation and combat extraction. Every student at Orin's school would qualify in triage. Leora ordered the forest clans to gather, but she forbade attacks beyond Astera unless the Alliance crossed the sea first. Aldrich mobilized Imperial forces along the coast. Syra asked to speak with Kai alone. Her guard remained outside the laboratory door. She explained that Talisar's sacred engine was failing. Decades of drawing power from harvested cores had exhausted the island network. Factories went dark each winter. Water pumps failed in poor districts, while the League's ruling houses kept their towers lit. Marvek needed Astera's forest cores to preserve the system that kept him in power. Solkar did not know the full plan. Its priests believed they would sterilize the forest and return home. Marvek intended to connect the sacred engine to the exposed roots afterward and drain the continent. Syra had served the Bureau because she believed science could prevent epidemics. White Boundary had shown her what research looked like when patients had rights. She handed Kai the military codes she had once sworn to protect. The codes included supply orders dated 2 months before the ultimatum. A fleet crossing from Talisar or Solkar required 8 to 10 weeks in favorable weather. The invasion force had therefore sailed before Solon and Marvek presented their demands. Negotiation had never been their condition for peace. The first blockade ships appeared 3 weeks later. They rose above the eastern horizon on columns of blue light. Solkar vessels followed beneath white sails that shone like mirrors. From Veyra's height, the combined fleets covered the sea in 2 moving lines. White Boundary had no sovereign flag for them to lower. The bell rang until every ward was ready. The blockade began in the first weeks of the 5th year. The fleets did not attack at once. They stopped beyond Veyra's comfortable flight range and closed the sea lanes. Talisar cruisers intercepted merchant ships and drove Eldor's sail-powered navy into western harbors. Solkar priests occupied the eastern coastal roads beneath mirrored beacons. The Alliance anchored supply hulks at captured ports, while solar collectors powered its airborne vessels during daylight. Agents destroyed the main stone bridge connecting White Boundary to Eldor's central grain route, and Aldrich's army requisitioned wagons for the coast. Supplies could still arrive through the west, but only by 2 narrow roads already crowded with refugees. Within 10 days, imported blue salt vanished from White Boundary's market. Mana crystals tripled in price. Glassmakers locked their remaining sand behind iron doors. Mara called the city council before dawn and placed 7 inventories on the table. The hospital and public granaries held enough common food for 26 days for the new refugee population. It had anesthetic for 19 major operations, blue salt for 14 long treatments, clean glass ampules for 11 days, and mana crystals for 1 full cycle of the Garden of 30 Seasons. The city population had climbed above 18,000 before the blockade. Refugees from the coast added hundreds each morning. Several merchants proposed using the accelerated garden for grain. Eloin calculated that the final crystals could produce 6 days of bread and leave no way to grow rare antidotes. Ordinary fields planted that morning would not feed anyone for months. Mara chose a harder plan. Grain exports stopped. Every household received ration tokens based on age, body size, and species metabolism. Centaurs required more calories than humans. Stone giants ate minerals rather than grain. Demons could survive on less food, but needed mana-rich broth. The ration system accounted for those differences, which made it slower and prevented equal portions from becoming unequal survival. Wealthy residents protested when their private stores were assessed. Mara did not simply seize them. The city bought excess grain with emergency bonds guaranteed by future market taxes. Owners who hid supplies faced fines under the charter. Owners who sold received written claims that would survive the war. 3 warehouses opened voluntarily. A 4th owner tried to move flour through a tunnel at night. Pip recognized the cough of dust beneath the floor while visiting a patient next door. Rauk found the carts and brought the owner to Mara, rather than breaking his arms. On Mara's recommendation, the emergency court sentenced him to work in the ration office, where he spent 12 hours each day measuring food for families who could not pay him. The accelerated garden went dark. Eloin removed its last crystals and divided them among the hospital, the water pumps, and Vera's rescue beacons. She turned export terraces into ordinary beans, root vegetables, and medicinal grain. Siva expanded mushroom caverns beneath the hill. Fungal protein tasted dull and caused stomach trouble in some species, so Kai's students developed different preparations instead of forcing one emergency food on everyone. Glass became the next crisis. Sterile medicine could not be stored in cracked bottles. Talisar had supplied most high-quality laboratory glass before the war. Tarn built clay pressure vessels. Minotaur smiths stripped copper from decorative roofs and reshaped it into boiling coils. Syra taught the glassworkers to use local river sand, though it produced green bottles that hid contamination. Pip solved part of the problem by painting a white test line inside each bottle. If the contents changed acidity, the line changed color. Blue salt could not be replaced so easily. Cassian's old lung treatment required it, as did several filters in the Dragon Ward. Gray Path hunters found a weaker mineral in a northern cave. The first batch contained arsenic. Siva removed most of it through fungal binding. Kai refused to approve the substitute until 3 independent tests agreed. Every delay meant a patient waited. A miner with glass lung died while the safe batch was being prepared. His colony ruptured during the night. Kai reached the ward in time to drain the blood, but not restore the destroyed tissue. The system showed that using the contaminated salt might have given him a chance, and might also have killed 6 later patients through arsenic poisoning. Kai wrote the miner's name in the blue book. He did not reverse the safety rule. The blockade tested the city's laws more effectively than speeches ever had. Human refugees received the same ration assessment as forest families. Wounded enemy sailors rescued from a storm received emergency care, then confinement under Cassian's guard. Leora allowed Imperial grain convoys through forest paths that had been hidden from humans for centuries. Aldrich sent engineers to repair those paths instead of mapping them for later taxation. The first convoy reached White Boundary on the 18th day. Rationing, mushroom production, and the hidden route stretched the original stores until the ordinary fields produced their first harvest. The city never regained a surplus, but it no longer faced a fixed date of starvation. Marvik expected hunger to divide them, and on the 31st day, his plan came close to succeeding. A riot began outside the southern bakery after a false notice claimed demons were receiving double rations. The notice carried Mara's copied seal. Roke's guards formed a wall around the bakery. Human Imperial troops approached from the western gate. Stones struck both sides. Kai reached the square after a boy had been trampled. He treated the child on the bakery steps, while Mara climbed onto a cart with the real ledgers. She read the ration figures aloud. Demons received smaller grain portions and larger mana broth portions. A human infant received less weight than an adult goblin, but more usable calories. The copied notice had counted liquid broth as solid grain. Cassian found the source inside an abandoned Talisar trade relay that had been installed before Red Sleep and sealed when the Glass District closed. A hidden signal needle had awakened from across the sea and printed the forged order with Mara's copied seal. The riot had been an operation, not a spontaneous mistake. Mara displayed the device in the square. Anger turned away from the bakery, but she did not pretend the food shortage was solved. She reduced her own ration publicly after realizing that smaller officials had already made the same sacrifice, while she had rejected their request. The crowd dispersed before the soldiers drew weapons. That night, the fleets moved closer. The first attack looked like snow. White particles drifted from Solkar vessels high above the eastern woods. Children ran into the street to catch them. Elowin felt the root network contract and screamed for the alarm. Breg's bell sounded 3 times. Viera swept low over the roofs, driving the false snow upward with her wings. The motion saved the central market and carried the cloud toward the northern farms. Workers there collapsed among the new bean rows. The system identified 2 linked agents. Solkar Light had sterilized the particles until ordinary bacteria could not consume them. Talisar Engineering had filled each shell with a pattern that suppressed life cores on contact. Red Sleep had targeted dense non-human mana. White Silence attacked the basic circulation shared by every living body. Humans fell beside demons. Birds dropped from the air. Leaves curled along the road. Kai ordered everyone indoors and cloth placed over mouths, then changed the order when the system showed the particles passing through dry fabric. Siva soaked masks in mushroom oil. Elowin added root sap that trapped the mineral shell. The combined filter worked for 20 minutes before clogging. The hospital filled within an hour. White Silence worked slowly, reducing each core pulse until organs failed from within. Human patients became cold. Demons lost color in their eyes. Goblins slipped into dangerous metabolic collapse. Dragons could keep one heart beating while the other slowed, which tore the vessels between them. The connecting vessel inside a young dragon began to split. Kai used pulse clamp for 3 heartbeats, while Varen bound the weakened section. When the flow returned, the rebound knocked Kai against the next bed and left his own pulse skipping. Kai opened sterile field over the first ward. The particles resisted. They were already sterile. The field could not kill what contained no living contamination. He changed its purpose. Instead of suppressing microbes, he focused on unstable mana. The white shells cracked, but the effort pulled heat from his body. Frost formed in his hair. After 4 minutes, he could not feel his hands. Varen dragged him outside the field and took over warming the patients. Pip marked those whose core pulse continued falling. Students moved heated stones between beds. Siva delivered filtered broth. Elowin threaded living roots through cracks in the floor to carry small pulses of natural mana into the weakest bodies. It did not remove the particles. Explosions struck the eastern wall. Talisar landing craft descended behind the false snow. Armored teams carried narrow towers on their backs. Once planted, each tower opened like a metal flower and released a continuous white silence field. Rauk led Greypath hunters through the outer farms to stop them. He chose shallow irrigation trenches as cover and ordered his fighters to carry wet filter cloth over their faces. Soulcar light swept the field in bright bands. Wherever it touched, grass turned gray. The first hunter who charged directly reached a tower and fell before striking it. Rauk changed the approach. Elowin raised roots beneath the soil and tilted the towers from below. Vieira's rescue dragons dropped water from above. Mud swallowed the stabilizing legs. Talisar soldiers anticipated the dragons. Harpoon launchers rose from the landing craft. Vieira saw the chains and broke formation. Her old wound spasmed during the turn. One harpoon passed beneath her injured wing. A younger dragon took another through the rescue harness and crashed beyond the orchard. Rauk divided his team. Half continued toward the towers. Half went for the fallen dragon. The choice allowed 2 additional towers to activate. White silence reached the hospital's eastern ward. Every lamp, powered by mana, went dark. Elowin's roots withered across the floor. A child, on breathing support, stopped moving. Kai used double pulse to hold the child's heart and core in sequence. He could manage 30 seconds safely. The filters were failing across the ward. Varen needed 7 minutes to move everyone into the stone basement. Kai linked Soul Suture to the hospital's foundation. The system showed hundreds of weak life circuits at once. Pain tore behind both eyes. He could not treat them individually. He created a temporary path from the remaining mana crystals in the water pumps to the ward, then divided the current through the copper heating pipes. The pipes had not been built for mana. Joints burst. Steam filled the corridor. 2 students suffered burns. The improvised current reached the beds and restored enough core pressure for evacuation. Kai lost sight in his right eye. Outside, Rauk reached the nearest tower. A Talisar officer held a shield that redirected magic into the ground. Rauk's first strike shattered the sword in his own hand. The officer drove a hooked blade into the ogre's side. Rauk trapped the weapon between his ribs, pulled the man close, and headbutted him through the visor. 3 soldiers closed around him. Grey Path hunters fired from the trenches, forcing one back. Elowin's last healthy root caught another ankle. The third stabbed Rauk's thigh. Rauk abandoned the shattered sword and used the tower itself. He tore its wet filter tank from the base and poured the contents into the exposed power channel. The machine discharged through every metal surface. Rauk fell with the soldiers as the tower exploded. Its field vanished from the hospital. Vieira's dragons used the opening to lift the wounded from the orchard. Tarn advanced behind a slab of quarry stone, giving hunters cover to reach the second tower. Rather than destroy it, they cut the control lines and turned its own fan toward the sea. The tower burned out its control crystal as soon as the lines broke. Its casing could be studied, but White Boundary could neither restart it nor reproduce the crystal with local materials. The third tower withdrew with the landing craft. White particles covered 6 farms and 2 districts. More than 800 people required treatment. 42 died before midnight. Among the captured wounded was a Soulcar field medic with old scars across his lungs and mana channels. He had survived the Ash River epidemic as a child, in the same province where Solon had grown up. Kai showed him that the scars carried signs of repeated soil sterilization rather than forest infection. The medic authorized an anonymous copy of the diagnostic pattern to be used if it could prevent another attack. Kai's sight returned as a blurred circle the next morning. The system warned that another scan of similar scale could make the damage permanent. He scanned again, and this time he compared one white particle to the scar pattern in Cassian's lungs. Both formed mineral shells around a biological or magical core. The inhaled medicine that had broken Cassian's crystals could weaken White Silence if carried through the body before the particles attached completely. Blue salt was almost gone. Siva proposed the weaker northern mineral. Its arsenic remained dangerous. Elowin used living root membranes to bind the poison after the medicine entered the blood. Varen calculated doses for humans. Pip adjusted for goblin metabolism. Vera provided a tiny sample from the fallen dragon, allowing the team to test both heart circuits. The first treatment restored core flow for 7 minutes, then failed. The second caused violent fever as the shell broke. On the third, Syra changed the pulse sequence based on the Crimson Sleep research. The white particles opened. Siva's enzyme dissolved their inner pattern. Eloin's membrane trapped the arsenic and carried it into the bowel. The patient survived, and production began. But the city lacked enough mineral for everyone. Mara divided doses by clinical need, not social rank. Patients whose cores could recover with heat and rest waited. Those already losing organ function received the medicine first. Aldrich's wounded officers waited behind children from the northern farms. Leora enforced the order when an imperial noble tried to move his brother's name. The treatment reduced deaths. It did not stop the next attack. 2 more waves crossed the forest over the following week. Solkar priests adjusted the light, so wet masks dried faster. Talisar shells grew smaller and passed through Siva's first filter. Each change forced another response. Eloin layered sap with charcoal. Glassworkers made ceramic masks with replaceable fungus pads. Viera's teams flew below the trees rather than above them. Tarn built angled roofs over the farm roads to catch falling particles. White Boundary adapted, but every adaptation consumed something it could not easily replace. Then, a signal arrived from inside the enemy fleet. It used Syra's old bureau code. Syra had left White Boundary 3 days after the first attack, once the initial treatment entered production. During the first week of the blockade, White Boundary had rescued 2 Talisar medical sailors from a disabled survey launch. The launch remained impounded at the lower dock. One sailor agreed to help Syra return under a medical exchange flag. After learning that White Silence had also been tested on Talisar prisoners, Cassian authorized the mission. Syra used her old bureau seal, the captured launch, and a false report claiming that Red Sleep had damaged the city's defenses. She boarded a Talisar medical vessel as an epidemic inspector. Her task was to learn how White Silence was controlled and return before the fleets moved inland. The plan had been kept from most of the council. Leora would have refused to trust Syra beyond the walls. Kai learned only after the vessel was already at sea. The signal gave a location beneath the eastern cliffs. Viera could not approach openly. Harpoon batteries watched the sky. She flew through a rain channel below the cliff line while Cassian rode in the rescue frame. Kai went with him because the message included a medical distress code. They found a Talisar launch drifting between rocks. Syra lay beneath its broken mast. A metal shard had entered below her ribs. 2 enemy sailors shared the boat, one unconscious and one trying to stop Syra's bleeding with his coat. The conscious sailor was the same junior medic who had helped her cross the blockade. After Syra stole the tower charts, he and another crewman chose to escape with her, rather than report her. A pursuit craft had fired through their mast and driven the metal fragment into her side. Cassian wanted to take the charts and leave the sailors. Kai climbed aboard and treated all 3. The conscious sailor stared at Leora's seal on Kai's sleeve. He had expected the monster doctor from Talisar propaganda to carry knives for harvesting cores. Instead, Kai instructed him to hold pressure on Syra's wound and use the man's own belt to stabilize his broken wrist. Veira lifted the launch beneath her rescue harness. Harpoons rose along the cliff. Cassian fired signal arrows toward empty rocks, drawing the first volley away. Veira flew low enough for one wingtip to strike spray. A chain caught the rear of the launch. The sudden pull reopened Syra's wound. Kai held the shard steady, while Cassian cut at the chain. A second harpoon struck Veira's harness plate. Her 2 hearts lost rhythm under the impact. Kai could not reach her chest from the boat. He tied his diagnostic thread to a silver scale and called the timing through the wind. Viera slowed the flight heart. Cassian cut the chain on his 3rd strike. The launch swung free and crashed against White Boundary's lower dock. Syra reached surgery alive. The shard had cut part of her liver and carried White Silence residue. Veron removed it, while Kai monitored the spreading pattern. Pip controlled bleeding from a vessel hidden behind the organ. The enemy sailors waited under guard in the next room and received treatment before questioning. Syra woke after 2 days. Leora learned that Cassian had authorized the mission without council approval. At her demand, the council removed his right to order foreign operations alone and required a second council seal for any future mission. The argument ended there only because the enemy was preparing another attack. Syra brought 3 pieces of information. The first was a complete design for the White Silence towers, including a vulnerable coolant ring beneath each base. The second was proof that Marvik planned to connect the sacred engine to Astera's roots. Solkar's army believed it was conducting a limited purification. Once the forest network was exposed, Talisar would drain it. The resulting collapse would kill Solkar soldiers as readily as Astera's population. The third concerned the outbreak itself. White Silence drew power from the strongest stable core inside its range. In White Boundary, that source was Leora. Each attack had been feeding on the Queen's recovered core. The system confirmed it when Kai examined her. Hairline fractures surrounded the central flame. Leora had hidden the pain and continued leading the defense. Her core remained the only structure powerful enough to provide a complete template for an antidote. The system displayed the fastest treatment. Remove the restored royal core. Dissolve it into the continental circulation. Predicted survival of local population, 88%. Predicted survival of donor, 0%. Kai closed the display before Leora saw it. Kai spent the next 30 hours looking for another answer. He tested fragments of Leora's blood, shed dragon scales, human marrow, goblin liver fluid, dryad sap, and samples from every recovered White Silence patient. None produced a template strong enough to resist the next wave across the entire city. The system repeated its recommendation whenever he asked for the highest probability. Kai told the council that Leora needed rest. He did not disclose the sacrifice protocol. He justified the secrecy as patient confidentiality, although the patient herself had not been informed. Leora recognized the evasion because their life circuits had remained faintly connected since the first resonance. When Kai looked at the fracture in her core, she felt him close the connection. On the second night, she entered the laboratory while he slept over a table of failed cultures. The diagnostic lens lay beneath his hand. She touched it. The lens recognized the life signature recorded during her first treatment. Under the white code, the diagnosis belonged to the patient, and the system opened her sealed record without requiring Kai's permission. Kai woke to the sound of glass breaking. Leora stood beside the shattered culture trays. Her core glowed through the cracks beneath her skin. "How long were you going to decide whether I was allowed to know the price of my own life?" she asked. Kai said he had not decided to use the protocol. "That is not what I asked," Leora said. Leora had ruled people through famine, clan war, and plague. She had ordered soldiers into battles that would kill them. She was willing to give her core if it remained the only way to save the forest. Kai had taken that choice from her because he could not bear the answer. He tried to explain that the system treated her as material. Leora answered that hiding the recommendation had done the same thing. He had reduced her to a patient who needed protection from knowledge. She left the laboratory and moved into the forest command post. The argument damaged more than their relationship. Leora informed the council. Several chiefs demanded immediate use of her core, believing their queen's sacrifice would save the clans. Human representatives feared the procedure would transfer control of the city to the forest army. Rauk threatened anyone who spoke of cutting out Leora's heart while she still breathed. Kai presented the probabilities publicly. The sacrifice offered 88% because one core would impose a single strong pattern across the network. A composite treatment could avoid death, but the system estimated only 41% with their current samples. It required voluntary tissue from many species, synchronized at the exact moment White Silence entered the roots. Mara asked whether 41% was a final limit or the result of incomplete preparation. Kai admitted it was the second. The city chose to attempt the composite method first. Leora signed a separate order, stating that if the method failed and no alternative remained, she consented to the use of her core. Kai signed beneath it as her physician, acknowledging that the choice belonged to her. They began collecting samples, and consent slowed the process. A frightened population would have produced material faster under force. White Boundaries law required explanation, waiting periods where possible, and the right to refuse. A centaur donated tendon fluid. A harpy gave marrow from a hollow wing bone. Tarn allowed Kai to scrape living crystal from his repaired core. Viera offered blood from both hearts. Rauk provided another outer layer from his mana core, despite wounds that had not healed. Humans, goblins, satyrs, demons, dryads, minotaurs, and 12 smaller peoples added their patterns. Siva built separate cultures, because several samples destroyed one another when mixed. Elowin grew a living membrane through the laboratory floor. Syra converted the tower frequency into a pulse sequence. Varen and Pip designed infusion routes for bodies with different circulations. The system's probability rose to 59%, which left too much of the city exposed. Kai returned to Oren's journals. A note beside the ancient modules described immune memory as a conversation between injuries. The patterns did not need to become identical. They needed a common interval, a pause every body recognized as rest. Kai thought of Viera's two hearts. Their rhythms differed, but every fifth cycle, they entered the same brief silence. He calculated a shared pause across the donated patterns. The probability rose to 73%. Leora returned to the laboratory while he tested it. They had not repaired the personal wound between them. Work came first because the next fleet formation was already moving. Kai gave her every page of the protocol. She read them, asked questions, and changed the order of 2 demon samples. He accepted the correction. Only then did she allow him to examine her core again. Through the remaining months of the 5th year, the Alliance tightened the blockade and launched smaller probes, while Marvek assembled enough towers for a full landing. Partial composite doses kept the fractures in Leora's core from widening, and she delegated daily patrol command to Rauk, while conserving strength. White Boundary used the delay to collect more voluntary samples, train mixed medical teams, harvest its ordinary fields, and rebuild the basin channels after every attack. By the final week of winter, Viera's scouts saw the whole invasion formation moving toward shore. The final composite treatment required the enemy to activate White Silence at full strength. The attack would open a path into the roots. If their timing failed, the lattice would carry the wrong pattern across Astera. The city had to leave its walls and hold the towers in place long enough to use them. The Alliance landed at dawn on the 5th day of the 6th year. 12 Talisar craft crossed the eastern farms under a shield of Solkar light. Each carried a White Silence tower. Behind them marched infantry in sealed armor, followed by priests whose mirrored staffs burned paths through the forest. Aldrich's Imperial Army held the western side of the river. Leora's clans waited among the eastern trees. White Boundary stood between them, its hospital roofs covered with wet filter cloth, and its streets divided into evacuation lanes. Kai's plan required at least 2 towers to reach the old irrigation basin below the city. A 3rd tower would make the transmission stronger, but any tower planted outside the basin could overwrite the shared frequency and had to be disabled. Tarn had strengthened the basin walls and buried copper channels beneath the mud. Elowin connected those channels to the outer roots. Syra prepared false signal beacons that made the site appear to be a weakness in the defense. If the enemy planted 2 towers there, White Boundary could use their combined discharge to carry the composite pattern into the continental network. The plan also required everyone to survive long enough for the towers to activate. Rauk positioned Grey Path teams inside abandoned drainage tunnels. Vera's dragons waited behind the ridge with rescue frames instead of saddles. Minotaur crews operated heavy crossbows designed to break armor joints. Human engineers from Aldrich's army controlled floodgates along the river. Mara coordinated food, medical carts, and replacement filters from the council hall. The force looked like an army because war had arrived. Most of its commanders had learned their roles while moving patients, digging drains, growing medicine, or carrying wounded bodies through the forest. The first Talisar craft followed Sarah's false beacon. It descended over the basin and deployed a tower. The second landed 20 paces away. The third changed direction at the last moment. Marvek had recognized the pattern. Its pilot fired into the irrigation wall. Mud and stone erupted. One buried copper channel snapped. Elowin felt the broken root like a cut across her arm. Kai ordered Tarn to leave cover and repair it. Tarn crossed the open field, carrying a slab of stone. Soulcar light struck his shoulder and peeled away a layer of living crystal. He kept moving. Minotaur crossbows fired over him, forcing the nearest priests to lower their mirrors. Tarn dropped into the basin, drove both hands into the broken wall, and held it together while workers connected a temporary copper braid around his body. The third tower landed farther north. Rauk changed the gray path route. His team crawled through a drainage tunnel, filled waist-deep with cold water. White silent particles seeped through cracks overhead, their filters clogged before they reached the exit. One hunter began to slow. Rauk gave her his spare filter and continued with a wet strip of cloth over his mouth. They emerged beneath the tower's rear platform. Syra's blueprints placed a coolant ring 2 feet under the outer shell. Talisar had altered the design. An armored collar now protected it, and 6 soldiers guarded the access bolts. Rauk sent half his team to strike the soldiers, then climbed the tower itself. His burned hands slipped on the smooth metal. The life suppression field pulled strength from his core with each foot. A soldier cut the strap around his leg. Rauk fell, caught the edge with one hand, and swung into the coolant vent. He drove an iron chain wedge made in Bregg's forge between the rotating plates. The tower shuddered, but continued operating as the coolant pressure climbed. Rauk saw the release valve on the opposite side. Reaching it meant crossing the open gap between the plates. He wrapped his left arm in the chain and pushed it into the mechanism to stop the rotation. Metal closed around the arm. He pulled the valve with his right hand. The coolant ring burst. White vapor knocked soldiers from the platform. The tower's field flickered. Rauk could not free his arm. The plates began turning again. A gray path hunter tried to reach him. Rauk ordered her back. He drew a short blade, placed it above the trapped elbow, and cut through his own arm before the mechanism pulled the rest of him inside. He dropped into the mud, holding the severed limb against his chest as the tower shut down. His team carried him toward a rescue marker. Vera descended through harpoon fire. 2 bolts struck her armored harness. She held still long enough for the hunters to secure Rauk, then rose beneath the tree line. Kai saw the rescue signal from the basin and wanted to run to the hospital. A colored panel on Vera's harness changed from red to yellow after Varen's field assessment, showing that Rauk's bleeding had been controlled. Kai stayed at the channels. The 2 basin towers opened. White silence poured downward. Eloin released the first composite culture into the roots. Siva activated its fungal carriers. Syra matched the enemy frequency with a sequence of mana pulses. Kai held Soul Suture over the junction. The donated patterns entered in order, beginning with human and goblin signals, followed by demon, dragon, dryad, minotaur, centaur, harpy, and stone giant patterns. The smaller peoples followed, each separated by the shared pause Kai had calculated. The system raised the probability to 79%. The pattern spread beyond the basin. For several seconds, the white coating on the fields cracked. Patients in the hospital regained core pressure. Eloin felt sleeping roots open beneath miles of forest. Marvek answered by changing every Talisar tower's frequency at once. The common pause shortened. The composite sequence fell out of step. The pattern that should have protected the roots began cutting them. Eloin collapsed to one knee. Blood colored the bark along her arms. Kai tried to interrupt the transmission, but the enemy towers had already entered the network. Destroying them now would trap the broken sequence inside. Syra needed the new frequency. The signal came from the command craft hovering above the northern ridge. Cassian took 6 Imperial scouts and went after it. They moved through the fighting, while Leora's legions struck the Soulcar flank. Demons opened shadow paths between trees, allowing Imperial shield units to appear where the priests expected forest archers. Soulcar answered with expanding rings of light that closed the paths and burned anyone still inside. Leora raised a wall of shadow that forced the priests to turn their mirrors toward her, then ordered human crossbows to fire at the exposed backs of the staffs. When the priests rotated again, Vieira's dragons dropped stones onto the shield emitters. Each side adjusted. Each opening lasted seconds. Cassian reached the command craft during one of those openings. The scouts seized its lower deck, while he climbed through a maintenance hatch toward the signal chamber. Soldiers wearing breathing tubes connected to the ship defended the chamber. The first released white silence gas into the corridor. Cassian's scarred lungs began bleeding before his filter sealed. He used the narrow passage against them. A bow was useless at close range, so he broke a lamp, threw oil across the floor, and ignited it behind him. The ship's ventilation reversed to pull smoke away from the signal chamber. White silence gas flowed with it, exposing the soldiers to their own weapon when Cassian cut their breathing lines. He reached the control crystal. An officer shot him through the left side of the chest. Cassian killed the signal with his knife, copied the frequency onto Syra's relay plate, and fell through the hatch as the craft tilted. Vera caught him in a rescue net below. The surviving Imperial scouts sealed the lower deck, disabled the lift engines, and forced the command craft to land behind the northern ridge. They held it there with its final harpoon launcher intact. The frequency reached the basin. Syra rebuilt the shared pause. Kai guided the damaged composite pattern back into alignment. Elowin pushed healthy root sap around the cuts. The Continental Network accepted the treatment. White silence across the eastern fields lost its uniform shape. Some particles dissolved. Others became inert powder. The first stage held until a shadow larger than any cruiser spread across the basin. Marvek's flagship rose above the fleet like a metal city. Blue pipes covered its underside. Thousands of small core stones burned behind glass plates. Some came from animals. Too many carried the recognizable patterns of intelligent beings. A drill of condensed mana descended from the ship into the irrigation basin. It struck the roots beneath Kai, and the ground opened under his feet. Kai fell into darkness with Elowin and Syra. They landed on a web of roots, thick enough to support buildings. Pale light moved inside them in slow waves. The chamber extended beyond Kai's sight. Stone arches curved around the network, carved with the symbols of the diagnostic module. Above, the sacred engine's drill pierced the central root and began pulling mana upward. The effect crossed the continent. Elowin heard distant groves cry through the network. Vera's dragons lost altitude. Demons dropped where they fought. Human spell lamps dimmed in the western capital. The system changed the diagnosis. Planetary circulation collapse had begun. Kai found an old control platform built into the root. The diagnostic lens fit its center. When he placed it there, his sight expanded beneath the land. He saw the forbidden forest as a branching immune organ. Monster cores filtered unstable mana and returned it to the soil. Migrating magical beasts carried corrected patterns between regions. Human settlements had grown in the quiet zones between those currents. The two forms of life had never been separate systems. He also saw the damage. Talasar's industries had drained island roots until entire branches turned black. Solkar's choir had burned corrupted regions so completely that healthy circulation could not return. Astera remained the strongest network, which was why both powers had come for it. The sacred engine pulled harder. The drill lay beyond Kai's reach underground. The solar shield turned Aldrich's artillery aside, while the priests kept Leora's army pinned. Syra studied the control platform. The ancient symbols matched components inside the sacred engine. Marvek had built his machine around the circulation module, but reversed its flow. If the diagnostic module re-established the original direction, the engine would have to choose between releasing the stolen cores or tearing itself apart. Kai needed access to Solkar's sterilization module as well. Infection already filled the network. Restoring circulation without controlled cleansing would spread white silence to every root. Solon still controlled the solar choir. Kai sent the evidence through the mirror relay. He showed the living roots, the stolen core patterns, and the engine's drain. Solon's answer came as a beam of concentrated light. He believed the chamber was the source of corruption. The solar choir focused above white boundary. Leora saw the light gather from the eastern battlefield. She crossed through a shadow path to the white line at the city gate, placing herself between the beam and the hospital district. She could have withdrawn into the forest. Instead, she opened every shadow channel in her core and raised a dome over the city. The first impact drove her to one knee. Roof tiles lifted into the air. The hospital windows burst inward. The second impact cracked her recovered core. Kai felt it through their life resonance. The connection filled with heat and then went silent. Leora fell beside the white line at the city gate. Vera carried her to the hospital. Varen opened the old scar beneath her collarbone and found the royal core divided into 4 unstable chambers. Pip prepared silver sutures, while Rauk, pale from blood loss and missing an arm, ordered the remaining guards to protect the operating room. Kai climbed toward the surface. Syra blocked him at the edge of the root platform. If he left, the sacred engine would drain the network before he reached Leora. Elowin could hold the central root for minutes. No one else could use the diagnostic module. A mirror beside the platform showed the hospital. Varen saw Kai's face in it. He had blood across both sleeves and a crack in his spectacles. Behind him, Pip controlled one chamber of Leora's core with a temporary clamp. Kai said he was coming. "Stay where you are," Varen said. "Pip has the second chamber. I have the first. Do your part, and let us do ours." Kai had taught them how demon channels closed under pressure. He had taught Pip how to read a pulse that did not belong to his own species. He had built a school, because one pair of hands could not hold a city together. Varen would operate. Pip would assist. Siva would manage the core-preserving solution. An explosion shook the ward. Dust fell into the surgical lamps. Rauk ordered guards to move a stone shield outside the wall. Kai watched Pip place the first suture. His instinct pulled him toward the stairs until his muscles shook. He pressed both hands against the root platform and stayed. Cassian arrived in the next operating room with a collapsed lung and a bullet near the old crystal scars. A student began preparing him while Varen continued with Leora. Mara stood between the two rooms and coordinated supplies through a speaking tube. The hospital functioned without Kai. It did not function easily. A rigid silver suture tore through Leora's first core chamber as the tissue swelled. Pip recognized the same mistake adults had once made when they assumed his goblin anatomy would behave like a human body. He replaced the silver with a flexible fungal fiber Siva had developed for living tissue. Cassian's scar tissue trapped air around the heart. The student froze until Siva recognized the pressure and drove a drain between his ribs. Rauk lost consciousness when his tourniquet slipped. Every solution came from someone who had once entered the last lantern as a patient, creditor, guard, or frightened parent. Kai turned back to the world beneath the city. The ancient platform displayed 3 disconnected rhythms. The diagnostic module pulsed beneath Kai's hands. The circulation module beat inside Marvek's flagship. The sterilization module burned through Solan's choir above the clouds. They resembled Vera's 2 hearts and a third organ that had forgotten the interval between them. Kai began with circulation, using Cassian's lung treatment as a model. The roots were filled with mineral residue from centuries of extracted cores. Elowin released binding sap through the healthy branches. Siva's composite culture, still active in the irrigation channels, attached to the residue. Kai reversed pressure through the sacred engine for one short pulse. Black material moved out of the roots. Marvek felt the reversal. The flagship's pipes closed automatically. He redirected power through auxiliary cores and forced the drill deeper. The root beneath Kai split. Elowin drove both arms into the opening. Bark tore from her shoulders as she held the living edges together. She could not close it while the pressure continued. Kai used soul suture to link the damaged root to Taran's crystal pattern. The stone giant stood above the basin, still holding the wall. Blue lines spread through his body as the continental load reached him. His repaired core began to crack along the old seam. Tarn remained in place, and the borrowed stability gave Kai 6 seconds. He sent a second reverse pulse through the engine. This time, Syra opened maintenance valves using the codes she had stolen. Stolen core stones detached from the flagship's inner channels. Their energy flowed back toward the roots, instead of Marvek's weapons. The circulation module remembered part of its original function, while Solon's sterilization remained uncontrolled. Kai could not command it through diagnosis alone. He needed Solon to change the choir's focus, and Solon still believed the roots should burn. Kai sent him a patient record. It belonged to the Solkar field medic captured during the first tower assault. The man carried childhood scars from the same provincial epidemic Solon had survived, and he had authorized the anonymous pattern to be used to prevent further attacks. Diagnostic comparison showed the old disease had begun in a region where the solar choir repeatedly sterilized the soil. The cleansing killed the organisms that controlled wild mana. The plague had followed the treatment, not preceded it. Solon rejected the first transmission as fabricated. Kai sent the raw diagnostic pattern and opened the module for verification. Doing so allowed Solkar light into the platform. Heat burned across Kai's hands. If Solon chose, he could destroy the diagnostic module through the connection. The choir examined the record. Its ancient logic confirmed the match. Solon's beam shifted away from the city. For one moment, the three rhythms approached alignment. Marvek broke it by opening every auxiliary core inside the sacred engine and flooding the network with stolen energy. The surge forced the solar choir into a defensive cycle. Solkar light scattered. The circulation module accelerated beyond the root's capacity. The flagship began transforming around its chancellor. Pipes entered Marvek's arms and spine. Core plates closed over his chest. He connected his own nervous system to the engine, so no outside code could reverse it again. The system classified the result as a living mechanical graft with one central patient and thousands of unwilling donor organs. The drill widened. The root chamber began collapsing. Kai had treated a dragon with two hearts, a dryad whose body extended through soil, an emperor poisoned by his own symbol of authority, a spy whose lungs had grown around glass, and a city infected by an artificial pattern. The world beneath him contained every problem at once. Kai structured the response as linked operations. Elowin controlled the living tissue. Syra controlled the machine codes. Siva's culture carried immune memory. Tarn provided structural support. Solon's choir supplied narrow sterilization, where Kai marked corrupted branches. The circulation module pushed debris toward those branches instead of deeper into healthy roots. Kai used double pulse until his own heart lost rhythm. Then he counted manually, as he had during Vera's operation. Every fifth beat, the three modules entered a shared pause. At the first pause, Solon burned the white silence pattern from the northern roots. At the second, Syra opened the sacred engine's return valves. At the third, Kai closed the planetary tiers with soul suture. Marvek shortened the engine cycle until the shared pause disappeared. Kai's right eye went dark. Blood ran from both ears. The system offered an emergency skill unlocked by the completed network connection. Absolute operating field. Duration, 90 seconds. Cost, total system reserve and permanent loss of reward functions. Previously learned skills would remain, but they would draw directly from Kai's body without the reserve absorbing part of the strain. Kai accepted. The battlefield unfolded in Kai's sight as anatomy. He saw every ship, tower, root, engine pipe, mana channel, wound, and weapon within the connected region. Time kept moving, while the flood of information strained the limits of a human mind, and Marvek's drill continued descending. The 90-second limit began as Kai marked the load-bearing joists of the flagship. Aldrich's artillery fired at the first mark. The shells struck the same point 3 times. The outer armor buckled, but did not open. Talisar engineers shifted plates over the weakness. Kai moved the mark to the hinges controlling those plates. Minotaur crossbows hit them from below. Vera's dragons dropped quarry charges onto the exposed seam. The armor split with 78 seconds remaining. And Marvek redirected white silence through the opening. The first dragon formation broke. Vera's injured wing locked during the turn, and she began losing height. Kai used anatomical line to mark the densest seam through the cloud of particles. Elowin's roots raised a column of moisture beneath it. Solon's choir sterilized only the inner pattern, while Siva's fungal mist bound the shells. The cloud fell as harmless mud. Vera recovered above the rooftops. With 64 seconds remaining, Marvek detached 4 smaller craft from the flagship. Their control systems copied the central core signal, creating false targets. Kai's first diagnostic strike followed a decoy and cut power to an empty vessel. The mistake cost 8 seconds. Syra recognized that the real signal contained Marvek's heartbeat. She sent the rhythm through the platform. Kai separated it from the machine noise and marked the actual circulation line along the flagship's spine. Cassian, conscious despite the tube in his chest, heard the mark relayed into the hospital. He gave Mara the firing code for the Imperial Scouts holding the damaged command craft's lower deck. They turned its last harpoon launcher toward the flagship. The bolt entered the marked line. Blue energy erupted across the hull. With 48 seconds remaining, the sacred engine began releasing its stolen cores as ammunition. Each stone became a burning projectile aimed at White Boundary. Destroying them would erase the remaining life patterns inside. Kai changed the city shield. More than an hour had passed since Varen began the operation. Leora had regained a pulse, and he had reconnected 3 core chambers. The 4th remained unstable. She woke when the first projectiles fell. Pip ordered her to remain on the table and placed both hands over the surgical brace when she tried to rise. Moving her to the battlefield would tear the repaired chambers apart. Vera landed beside the broken hospital wall, carrying a silver scale from her own chest harness. Forest scouts had fixed matching shadow anchors around the city during the siege. Leora could reach those anchors through the scale without leaving the operating room. Siva reinforced the brace with living fungus. Leora closed one hand around Vera's scale and opened short shadow gates beneath the falling core stones. Each projectile passed through a prepared anchor and emerged above the irrigation basin, where Eloin's network received it. The stolen life patterns returned to the world instead of exploding over the city. The 4th gate strained the unfinished chamber. One suture reopened beneath Pip's hands. He clamped it, while Varen maintained the other 3 chambers. Leora closed the final gate, released the scale, and lost consciousness on the operating table. With 31 seconds remaining, Marvek abandoned the drill and aimed the entire engine at the city. If he could not preserve Talisar's power, he intended to erase the evidence of its crimes and kill the rulers who opposed him. The system showed a narrow route to his central graft. Kai could stop the engine by severing 3 connections. The first controlled movement. The second controlled weapon flow. The third connected Marvek's life to the circulation module. He cut the first with anatomical line, and the flagship stopped turning. He clamped the second with a field built from every copper channel beneath White Boundary, stalling the weapon charge. The third connection resisted. Marvek had woven it through thousands of donor cores. A direct cut would kill every remaining pattern inside the engine. With 20 seconds remaining, Kai opened a surgical path instead. Solon burned away corruption around the connection. Syra reversed the valves. Eloin held the receiving routes open. Vera's 2-heart rhythm provided the timing. The donor cores detached 1 layer at a time. Marvek fought back through his own body. He closed valves with his muscles after the controls failed. He drove metal splints deeper into his spine to keep the graft active. He redirected his heart through a backup pump. With 10 seconds remaining, Kai used pulse clamp on Marvek's right arm. The hand released 1 valve. Rauk, barely conscious in the hospital, gave the Grey Path hunters the code to destroy the matching coolant ring. The backup pump failed with 5 seconds remaining. Kai separated the final donor core. The absolute operating field ended. The system reserve emptied. Every reward window disappeared. The flagship hung above the basin, with its weapon charge trapped inside. Marvek remained connected to the central engine, which kept the battle alive after the field collapsed. The solar choir was the first system to fail. When Marvek forced the circulation module beyond its limits, white silence flowed backward through the link Kai had opened. The choir drew the pattern into Solon's body. His priests carried him from their command platform with white cracks spreading across his face and hands. The Solkar shield collapsed. Imperial artillery crews prepared to fire on the exposed platform. Kai marked the Solkar command group as patients under the white code and sent an emergency ceasefire signal. Aldrich repeated the order across the Imperial line before the first gun fired. Kai climbed from the root chamber with Syra and Elowen as the ground continued shaking. His diagnostic sight had returned as a faint gray outline. The larger system functions were gone, but he could still see the pattern inside a patient. Solkar soldiers formed a ring around their fallen prelate. Several aimed mirrored staffs at Kai. Leora's demons approached from the other side. One frightened movement could restart the entire battle. Kai crossed the space carrying a medical case. Solon was conscious. The cracks had reached his throat. His own core kept trying to burn the infection away, and each burst destroyed more healthy tissue. He accused Kai of bringing corruption into the choir. Kai placed the diagnostic lens on the ground between them. It projected the path of the backflow from Marvek's engine into the solar module, and from there into Solon's body. The pattern carried the same industrial signature Syra had found in the contaminated glass. Solon saw the proof. He still did not lower his guard. Kai explained the treatment. The composite antidote could open the white lattice. A narrow pulse from the choir could sterilize its inner structure. Solon would have to surrender control of the module for several seconds and allow a demon blood pattern into his core. For a man who had built his authority on purification, the procedure felt like defeat. The cracks reached his jaw before Solon consented. Vera provided a vial of the remaining composite. Kai inserted it through a channel beneath Solon's collarbone. Syra relayed the correct frequency. Elowen placed one root against his wrist to draw away the broken mineral shells. Solon activated the choir too strongly. The antidote burned before it crossed the heart. His pulse stopped. Kai compressed the chest while ordering the priests to reduce the light to 1/10. They did not know how. The ancient module had been operated through prayers and fixed ceremonial sequences for generations. Syra recognized a maintenance symbol on the nearest staff. She rotated its lower ring. The light narrowed. Kai delivered a second dose. This time, the lattice opened. Elowen pulled white residue through the root into a sealed clay jar. Solon's heart resumed after the third compression cycle, and the cracks faded slowly. The high prelate was lifted into a sitting position and looked across the battlefield. Talisar weapons were turning towards Solkar units now that their shield had fallen. Marvek had never intended to leave allies strong enough to challenge him after Astera was drained. Solon took the central mirrored staff. His ceasefire order traveled through every piece of the solar choir. Solkar priests lowered their weapons. Some hesitated until he projected the sacred engine's stolen cores and the backflow that had infected him. Then, their mirrors turned away from White Boundary and toward the flagship. Marvik forced open an emergency line through the backup pump after the absolute operating field collapsed. The improvised channel had not existed during Kai's scan. A blue beam cut across the basin, struck the Solkar platform, and continued toward the hospital. Tarn stepped into its path, and the beam entered the old crack in his core. For one terrible moment, his entire body shone from within. The resin repair failed. Stone split from his chest. Elowen redirected the nearest route around his core. Solon focused the choir on the beam itself. Vera struck the flagship's damaged armor with both hind claws. The line broke before it reached the hospital. Tarn fell, but his core remained in one piece. He would need years of repair. He lifted one hand from the ground to show Kai that he was alive. Marvek's flagship began descending into the basin. If its central charge touched the exposed roots, the resulting surge would spread through the continent. Kai needed to disconnect Marvek before impact. Vera carried him and Syra through the split in the hull. Solkar light held the armor open. Imperial scouts covered the entry from below. The engine corridors pulsed like arteries around them. They found Marvek in the central chamber. Metal covered most of his body. His face remained visible between pipes entering the jaw and spine. He controlled 6 mechanical arms through the graft. The floor around him held empty sockets where stolen cores had been removed. Kai's system produced one final clinical estimate. Voluntary separation from the engine offered a 61% chance of survival. Forced separation offered 17%. Continued connection would end in death within minutes and detonate the remaining charge. Kai told Marvek the numbers. Marvek laughed through blood in his throat. He had spent 30 years keeping Talisar's water pumps, factories, and seawalls alive. The League's islands held millions of people. Returning the stolen cores would darken cities and stop machines that sustained them. Syra answered that the circulation module could be restored. Tidal power, heat channels, and regulated world mana could replace core extraction over time. Talisar would suffer shortages, but it did not need to die. Who rules during those shortages? Marvek asked. Any transition that saved Talisar would remove him from power, and he already knew it. Kai offered treatment again. Marvek responded by sending 2 mechanical arms from the walls. Vera blocked one with her injured wing and cried out as the joint reopened. Syra ducked beneath the second and reached a control panel. The chamber rotated, throwing all 3 toward the descending side of the ship. Marvek closed the emergency valves around his graft. Kai could not reach the central connection. A blade unfolded from one mechanical arm and cut across his ribs. Kai used pulse clamp on the organic nerve entering the arm. The skill flickered with the exhausted system, but it slowed the blade long enough for Vera to tear it free. Syra opened the first safety valve. Steam filled the chamber. Marvek redirected pressure through his artificial lungs and continued fighting. The ground rose in the broken window. The flagship was seconds from impact. Kai saw the final control line beneath Marvek's breastplate. It passed through his natural heart before entering the engine. Cutting it while the engine remained active would kill him. Opening it slowly with his cooperation still offered a chance. Kai placed a hand on the plate and asked one last time. Marvek looked past him at White Boundary. Humans and forest peoples were carrying one another from the field. Solkar priests treated Imperial wounded under the same white cloth. The city represented a future in which the system that gave Marvek power had no reason to survive. He drove both hands into the overload controls, and Kai cut the line. Marvek's body arched. The mechanical arms stopped. Syra opened the remaining valves. Vera drove her shoulder into the chamber wall and broke a path to the outside. The engine charge released upward in a column of blue light instead of downward into the roots. The flagship struck the basin with its weapons dark, and Marvek died before the metal cooled. Kai remained beside him long enough to confirm the final heartbeat. He had offered a path that might have saved the patient. Marvek had chosen an action that would kill thousands. Stopping him had become part of protecting every other life on the field. Kai entered Marvek's name and cause of death in the Blue Book that evening, then closed it. The war ended in stages. Solkar units surrendered their heavy weapons before sunset. Talisar crews continued fighting in 3 coastal positions until Syra broadcast the sacred engine records and Marvek's final attack on his allies. 2 commanders attempted to destroy their archives. Cassian's scouts captured one set, the other burned. White Boundary spent the next month as a hospital larger than the city around it. Enemy soldiers lay beside defenders. Quarantine tents covered the eastern farms. Eloin's damaged roots carried clean water before they carried mana. Siva rationed antibiotics by culture time. Mara used the emergency bonds to purchase grain from inland provinces and recorded every sack, including those donated by families who had little to spare. The death count continued after the last weapon fell. White silence damaged kidneys, cores, roots, and developing eggs. Some patients seemed stable for days before failing. Kai's loft system rewards could not replace medicine. He worked with the same shortages as everyone else. The cut across Kai's ribs became infected and kept him away from surgery for 2 weeks. His right eye recovered only enough ordinary sight to recognize shakes and movement, although the diagnostic overlay still appeared when he deliberately called it. Elowyn regrew the bark along her arms over the next season, but several distant groves remained numb to her touch. Rauk survived the amputation. Infection nearly took the remaining arm, until Siva found a resistant fungus in one of her oldest cultures. Tarn and the Minotaur Smiths later built him a stone and steel prosthetic, controlled by tension lines across the shoulder. The first version crushed 3 cups and a door handle. Rauk kept it. Tarn's core required a permanent brace. He could still build, but lifting city walls alone was over. He trained crews to distribute weight through machines, which made construction safer than it had been when everyone relied on his strength. Vera's wing healed again with less movement than before. She ended combat flying and expanded the rescue service. Other dragons took the long routes. She handled training and difficult extractions close to the city. Cassian spent 6 weeks with a chest tube. Mara moved her work desk into his room after catching him reading intelligence reports under the blanket. Their arguments became quieter as his breathing improved. Leora remained weak for months. One chamber of her royal core never recovered its former capacity. Several forest chiefs expected her to hide the loss. She announced it herself and changed the law so rule of the Vir no longer depended on proving a strongest personal core. She and Kai repaired their relationship more slowly than her body. Kai apologized again for withholding the sacrifice protocol. This time he did not explain his fear, as if it erased the decision. Leora accepted the apology after he helped write a city rule requiring that system recommendations be entered into the patient's sealed record, including recommendations the physician considered unethical. The rule applied to him first. Marvek's records broke the Talisar League's ruling coalition. The 2 medical sailors who had escaped with Syra testified about white silence trials on prisoners. Court assemblies removed the houses that had supplied intelligent cores and formed an interim council of free ports. In Solkar, regional temples refused to recognize a successor chosen by the old inner circle, and created a reform assembly to supervise the solar choir. Solon returned to Solkar, under guard from his own priests. The ceasefire created a provisional tribunal, with judges from Eldor, the Ver Council, Solkar's Reform Assembly, and the free ports that replaced Marvek's government in Talisar. Solon resigned as High Prelate and appeared before that court. His testimony exposed generations of concealed damage caused by the solar choir. The tribunal sentenced him for the invasion and ordered him to assist in restoring sterilized lands. Kai testified that Solon's sincere fear explained his choices, but did not excuse them. Syra also stood trial before the same tribunal. She had spied on White Boundary and concealed the preventive tonic before Red Sleep. Her later actions saved thousands and provided the evidence that ended the war. The court barred her from Secret Service, placed her research under public oversight, and assigned her to lead an independent epidemic commission. Every trial she conducted required named patient advocates and open safety records. Talisar dismantled factories powered by intelligent cores. The transition caused blackouts, unemployment, and bitter protests. White Boundary did not solve the crisis with a single gift. Engineers restored part of the circulation module. Coastal pumps shifted to tides. Geothermal channels powered hospitals first. Astera supplied food under contracts that prevented the League's old houses from controlling distribution. Solkar used the solar choir at low intensity to treat confirmed corruption, while dryads and farmers restored soil life. Elowyn refused to let priests call the work purification. They called it rehabilitation in every treaty. The 3-continent medical accord became known as the White Law. It prohibited harvesting the core of an intelligent being. It protected medical neutrality, patient consent, diagnosis privacy, and access to emergency care. Each continent opened a White Boundary clinic, staffed by local healers and graduates of Oran's school. The city received reparations in grain, glass, blue salt, metal, and labor. Mara directed the first shipments toward drains, housing, and farm recovery, rather than monuments. The Garden of 30 Seasons remained dismantled for an entire year, while Elowyn restored its soil. When it reopened, its crystals were controlled by a medical and agricultural council. No ruler or merchant held the only key. The absolute diagnosis system formally completed its planetary protocol on the final day of the 6th year. The reward functions Kai had spent during Absolute Operating Field did not return. Treatment stopped producing silver, automatic repairs, and new skills. Kai retained diagnostic sight because the module still needed a physician, while the city continued through trained people, laws, farms, laboratories, and trade. The old clinic remained standing beside the larger hospital. They repaired its roof with ordinary timber. During the 7th year, Prince Lucen visited White Boundary with his parents. He was 4, serious around strangers, and fascinated by Pip's 2 appendix scars. He knew Kai as the doctor who had helped his parents before he was born. Selena corrected him when he called Kai a miracle worker. She said many people had made the treatment, and Kai had been the one who understood how to bring them together. Kai considered that a better explanation. Pip became the first goblin formally licensed as a surgeon under the White Law. His examination included human, goblin, demon, and basic dragon anatomy. Varen failed him on the first attempt for rushing a vessel repair. Pip passed 3 months later and framed both results. Mara and Cassian married in a small ceremony beside the hospital. Rauk's new hand crushed the ceremonial cup before he could pass it to them. Mara entered the cup as a security expense. Kai and Leora married later that year. The ceremony joined no crowns. Kai remained chief physician. Leora remained queen of the Vir. Their agreement stated that neither office passed automatically to a child. The terms sounded more like a treaty than a love vow, until Leora reached the line Mara had added about shared household expenses, and laughed hard enough to interrupt the efficient. Breg's bell rang over the city a year later, after Veron and Siva had confirmed that Leora's repaired core could carry a child without reopening its weakest chamber. She entered the maternity ward before dawn. Human and demon biology did not produce children by accident. Conception required a deliberate joining of life names, performed only after both partners chose it. Kai and Leora had waited until her core remained stable for a full year, and the city no longer depended on either of them surviving the next battle. Varen directed the delivery. Pip assisted. Siva managed the demon core medicines. Elowen kept a root beneath the room to stabilize ambient mana. Kai was ordered to wait outside. He lasted 9 minutes before opening diagnostic sight through the wall. Pip shut the viewing panel and told him that a physician who was also the anxious father had no authority in the operating room. Kai paced beneath Breg's bell. Rauk stood beside him with the stone hand tucked safely behind his back. Mara brought forms he did not read. Cassian pretended not to count the minutes. Viera watched through the courtyard opening. Tarn sat against the outer wall, his repaired core glowing softly through the brace. A child's cry came from inside, and Kai stopped beneath the bell. The door opened. Varen carried a small girl, wrapped in white cloth. 2 soft dark marks curved at her temples, where horns might grow. Her eyes remained closed. One hand opened and closed against the air. Her name was Neris. Kai entered the room only after Pip allowed it. Leora lay exhausted against the pillows, awake and smiling. The system placed one final line across Kai's sight. Heartbeat stable. He closed the diagnosis before it displayed anything else. Varen had already checked the child. Pip had checked her again. Siva had prepared the correct medicine, and Leora knew her own body better than any chart. Kai sat beside the bed and let Neris close her hand around one finger. Outside, the morning shift crossed the white line. Patients arrived from 3 continents. The clinic doors opened on time.